This is Jocko podcast number 359 with Echo Charles and me, Jocko Willink. Good evening, Echo.
Good evening.
There was a loud burst of gunfire, and Cowie fell to the ground, exposed in the street. He had taken a round to his right femur. The barrage of enemy gunfire continued to cascade toward him from multiple enemy positions, kicking up dust and sending ricochet and secondary frag of rock and concrete right at him. Cowie immediately returned fire but was unable to move quickly to cover because of the grievous injury to his leg. Within seconds of hitting the ground, Cowie heard a new weapon enter the chaos. Michael Monsoor, the automatic weapons gunner, broke from his covered position in an adjacent courtyard into the middle of the street. In that same moment, Michael sent a long burst of 7.62 millimeter rounds from his Mark 48 machine gun into enemy positions. Although carrying a heavy load of equipment, Michael deftly moved to where Cowie lay wounded and bleeding. He stood in front of him and used his lean frame and armor as a shield to protect Cowie from incoming enemy fire. This gave the wounded SEAL a reprieve he needed to continue to call for backup on his radio. Michael's technical acumen was apparent as he swiftly engaged and suppressed enemy positions with his Mark 48, affectionately known as the Pig. Every second and every round mattered. The other SEAL began to prepare Cowie to move while Michael engaged enemy insurgents. "Let's move," the other SEAL shouted. Michael grabbed Cowie's drag handle on top of his armor and began to pull him back to the courtyard while still firing his Mark 48. Cowie looked up at Michael as he dragged him across the road, but the perspective was not what he expected. Cowie felt as if, for just a moment, he had left his body below. He looked down upon the scene. As Michael dragged him, the snaps and ricochets of the heavy machine gun of enemy fire continued to hit the ground around them. Cowie couldn't believe that not one round had found its intended target. Instantly, the light seemed to shift. Then, Cowie saw them. Two large feathered wings wrapped from behind Michael around the trio as they moved him out of the street. Cowie knew in that instant they were not alone in the fight. Then Cowie was looking up at Michael again. He could feel the pain and hear the gunfire. Dust filled the air and the sun beat down upon them as they moved. Once back behind cover, the other SEAL began working on his injured teammate. The enemy fire picked up again just as Michael finished reloading. Michael answered with a heavy volley into the enemy position. JP and the rest of the squad, along with their Iraqi partners, joined the firefight minutes later. Lieutenant Seth Stone, the officer in charge of Delta Platoon, was deep into radio comms, providing situation updates to the chain of command, coordinating with units in other sectors, and facilitating the movement of the responding soldiers, Marines, and Iraqi partners into the fight. And that right there is an excerpt from a book that has just come out, which is entitled Defend Us in Battle, the true story of MA2 Navy SEAL Medal of Honor recipient Michael A. Monsoor. And the book was written by Michael's father, George Monsoor, along with Rose Ray, who is an author and is also the wife of a SEAL. And the book was written by interviewing friends and family of Michael. Many of the members of Task Unit Bruiser shared their stories to paint a picture of Michael's bravery, his character, his skill as a SEAL. But of course, Michael Monsoor was much more than just a SEAL. He was a man of compassion, of humor, of love, and of faith. He was the best. And he set an incredible example for all who knew him and for anyone that hears his story and it's an honor to have Michael's dad, George Monsoor, here with us tonight to share some of this incredible story with us. George, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me on.
It's an honor to have you down here. I know it's not that far of a drive, but I know it can be a little challenging sometimes. But glad you could make it down. I guess we have to start at this story, maybe at the beginning, with a little bit about you and your background. So you're originally from Wisconsin, is that right?
Yeah, I was born in La Crosse, and my family came from Lebanon. So there was that transition.
So are you first generation American, or are you second generation?
Yeah, it's like half were born, half. So I was, was half of that family. It was like 10 kids were born here, and half was born on the other side. So yeah, so there's a whole kind of a different world, the Middle Eastern world and the American world. So yeah, there's things that always a little different.
and so you were, how long did you stay in Wisconsin for?
Not very long. I think they asked us to leave like the first year. You know, they told us to get out of Wisconsin. We went to California.
And then it was California. Yeah. And so how old were you when you ended up in California?
I was probably
pretty young.
Yeah, I was probably about 1. And that's kind of, you know, where the rest of the family was born. I had 2 brothers and 3 sisters. My dad was in World War II, and he had a lot of problems after the war, and he couldn't hold down a job, and he ended up just being a gambler. So we had kind of a, you know, I mean, we didn't realize it wasn't the best, but our family was close, and my mom basically was the one that kept everything together. And we didn't realize we were poor until somebody told me in school.
And so then as you're growing up in California in like the 50s and 60s then.
Yeah.
That had to be pretty. Is it like, how does that compare with the movies?
Well, we would watch these movies and our TV shows, and you'd have Father Knows Best, and all these fathers are walking around with suits and ties. I look over at my dad. He's in his skivvies reading the racing form. The only thing he ever says to me is "beer me," you know. So yeah, I would look at the TV and I look at our family, just not quite the same.
So you end up, I mean, you're going to school. Where'd you go to high school?
I went to St. John Bosco, and it's a boys' school. I was fortunate that I was a pretty good football player, so it was a good fit. It was pretty tough. Those priests, these guys served in World War II, and they didn't put up with a lot of nonsense, and it was probably the best thing for me. They made it very clear what I could do and what I couldn't do.
And then, so you played football.
Yeah.
And what was your plan when you graduated? I mean, nowadays it's like everyone has to go to college. Did you have that plan, or?
Yeah, the plan was, because it was a college prep school, was to go to college, but it was an all-boys school. So my plan was different when I went to college.
You had to make up for lost time?
Yeah. Anybody that wanted to get on the back of my motorcycle, we're good. So I basically, my grades basically said to me, you're going to get drafted. So I decided to outsmart them, and I joined the Marine Corps.
Awesome.
Yeah.
You outsmarted him on that one, huh? So what year was it that you joined the Marine Corps?
68. I went 68 to 72.
So I mean, Vietnam is full blown in 1968 when you joined.
No.
Like you is it just known that you're going to Vietnam?
Yeah. Especially in my MOS. It wasn't the MOS I wanted. I was that guy that was always trying to stay out of the fray, you know, stay in the middle. You know? But anyway, the problem was if your grades weren't good, then you'd go straight over as a grunt. I didn't want to be a grunt. So I kept my grades up. But the thing was, every time you did well in school, you got another school. I did well in the tests, and I got aviation school. And then in aviation school, I did well, and I got helicopters. Helicopters is not where you want to be in the Marine Corps.
It's funny, even as you say, like, oh, I went to school for aviation. And like that sounds like a, you know, okay, you're gonna go learn this trade and you're gonna work on aircraft.
Exactly.
In Vietnam, that's a little bit different. It's a little bit of a different outcome.
I got there and I says, hey, you know, this wasn't the deal. You know, when you sign up, they tell you one thing, but you don't always get what you want. And I certainly didn't. It was like, this wasn't the deal. And the guy goes, you'll have more schools. Don't worry about it. The last school I went to was machine gun, 50 cal machine gun school. That was it.
What was the Shaka boot camp like?
Actually, playing Bosco football wasn't the boot camp wasn't a big deal. We had a coach that carried a baseball bat.
Jeez. And
I remember, since it was a Catholic school, he told us why God gave us heads, and that was to punish the other players. And he had this bat, and we had the cages, and he would smack you in the head with the bat, just so you understood what you're supposed to use your head for. And I remember we had a game, I think it was Venice, and we were just brutal. We weren't brutal on purpose. It was just that's the way we were trained to hit. And the principal wrote a letter to the school after the game, just trashing. We didn't cheat or anything. We played a straight game, but we laid people out. Yeah,
so Marine Corps boot camp was perfectly fine.
Yeah, it was fine. You know, I had a couple of problems. Just understanding it, because I really, my family served World War II, Korean War, and as you know, my sons all served in the Marine Corps other than Mike. But I didn't get it. I was like, I thought you go in and, you know, you get paid, I thought at least minimum wage. In all the military stuff, it just wasn't used to, because my father was definitely, you don't get a lot of discipline from a professional gambler. So it was another world for me. The most discipline I got was at St. John Bosco. But I remember on payday, you'd go in, you get a little bit of money to get your soap and those type of things. And so they gave us instructions. They said, you go in there, you march in there, you make a right turn, then a left turn, then you center yourself in front of the CO's desk. He will push a book in front of you. You look down and look at that pay book, and you will say, the pay is correct, sir, and look straight ahead. So I'm thinking, okay, you know, I do it perfect. And I look down, and I say, $36? Where's your military buried? And for $36. So they finally got my attention and got me squared away. I was a private for quite a while.
So the last school you went to was 50 cal school, but they sent you to Hilo school. And then what year did you deploy to Vietnam?
It was let's see, I think I was 19, so it was 69, and got back in 69, August 69, I think it was. Yeah, I think it was August 69. And
how was the deployment? How'd you get over there? Did you take a charter aircraft over there?
Yeah, we took I think it was a Pan Am. That was just a zoo. I mean, the officers were in front and the snuffies were in the back. And you could just see it on those stewardesses' faces which one they wanted to be, the front or the back. It was a long flight. I think it was 16 hours. And we landed. We landed once for fuel in Hawaii, and they literally wouldn't let us get off. They had the guards out there. I'm thinking, they passing the message to us or what? And then we finally got in and started sorting out where we were going to go. And I was really fortunate in the long run because you know how this works. You're a number, and these guys will go here and these guys will go here. And I just skated through the whole deal. I ended up only going there for just a little bit, and then I was simply at Okinawa most of the time. And I started feeling guilty because you know, my friends were over there, and then when they were coming back, some big changes, and it really broke my heart. And God, I feel so guilty. I was just there for a blink. So, you know how you're in the service and you just don't understand how certain things happen. You know, it's like how a close friend, you know, will go or some of them come back and they're just screwed up. And it reminded me of my dad, and that's why I didn't get my dad until I was in the Marine Corps, and I realized I would go to the hospital, at Veterans Hospital, when he was young and have these breakdowns, but I still couldn't get it through my head what was going on. Then after I saw the vets coming back in Okinawa, where you're getting cleaned up, ready to go, you realize there's some guys that really got hit hard mentally and physically too, but mentally is really something that just doesn't go away.
What did your dad do in World War II? Was he in the Army? Was he in the Marine Corps? Navy?
My dad was he's actually a super athlete. He was a Golden Glove champion. He was the Fleet Naval champion. And back then there was a lot of, that's where all the men were. But he was in the Navy, and he was on, I don't know what they call them, like pom-pom guns or something. They were on an air battleship, and his job was to protect the aircraft or the planes on the aircraft carrier. And a friend of his was telling me my dad would take it just bad if they hit those ships. He just thought he had to get every one. And he says that if they were taking fire, he would stay right on that gun. So
yeah, the films of the World War II U.S. Navy it's crazy to watch those things. It's crazy to watch those. And they have actually both sides. You know, they have the Japanese that are coming in to drop bombs. You can watch those films as well. Yeah.
And he was in all the big ones, you know, the Midway and all that stuff. And so it just mentally wiped him out. He would have these just go off on us.
Yeah, I don't think we're ever going to have a naval war like World War II again, where the humans are at such a massive amount of pressure. I mean, of course, something in the Navy can always go bad. I mean, you know, if a vessel, you don't even need a war. You know, things can happen. Yeah. But that World War II from a naval war perspective is just it's horrendous. I was talking with one of my friends the other day. Even just firing those big guns, these guys didn't have hearing protection. You know how many? You know, right now they're doing all these things with football and CTE and you know, traumatic brain injury, the TBI. Yeah. They tell us now in the SEAL teams we shoot these rockets, Carl Gustav rockets, and they like rock you. You know, it's like you just got cracked in the head.
Yeah.
And now we used to just sit out as a range safety officer. We just sit out there and shoot those things all day long. And now they're saying you can only shoot 3 a day and all this stuff. But can you imagine being like your dad on a naval vessel with you're just getting concussion after concussion after concussion? It's ruthless.
I don't think people understand how they just take it for granted. You know, you're 18, 19 years old. And or even the SEALs, you guys are in a firefight, and then next day you go into another one. You're looking at policemen who were in a firefight for a half hour, and they retire. You know, and it's like these kids are out there, and they just get up and do it and do it and do it. And my wife used to worry so much when we'd have these ceremonies and she'd meet the SEALs. And she used to just think, how much are they carrying around? How much baggage are they carrying around? And it's just, people just don't realize how it can just wipe a guy out. Those memories come back, and they just take it for granted. They, like you say, pros, they got this for them and that. And they got these young kids that are life and death situations, carrying 100 pounds on their back, 100 and some degrees, and it's like they do it again the next day.
And the next day, and
it's
the next
crazy.
day, and the next day.
This country doesn't understand what these guys go through. They don't appreciate it.
So you get done with Vietnam, your deployment to Vietnam, you come home, and you were planning the whole time you're going to do your 4 years and punch out?
Yeah, that was the plan. And it was funny. We were gone for 13 months, and the world really goes fast. I remember my buddies were sitting in the car. We're going to go get some beer. I wasn't even old. I think I was 20. And anyway, I go in to get the beer. And so as I go to leave, I stop and I go, hey, wait a minute, I need a church key. And the guy goes, a church key? A church key back then is what you used to open up your cans of beer.
See, right.
Okay. So, yeah. So, and the guy's looking at me and he goes, you don't need a church. How do you open up the beer then? And he goes like this. He pulls the beer out from under or a soda from under the counter, and he goes like this. He goes, you go like this, you know.
Oh, so the new cans had come out.
Cans. So I go back to the car, and the guys, I go, check this out, guys. And the guys go, whoa, where have we been?
Yeah, I've had some guys on that were POWs in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And like, these are guys that got shot down in like 1965, 1966, 1967. Yeah. They come back in 1973. It is a whole new world. I mean, it was a whole new world for them. And even the year, you must have been gone 69. That the world changed a lot in that year.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when we got back, they really hated us. I was stunned how many people hated us. And I'm thinking, what did we do? People just come out and insult us. I remember I was at the airport, and back then you had to fly in your uniforms. And it was not a good idea all the time. You were like targets. And I had a woman up in San Francisco just rush up to me, and she's got her children, and she just hates me, and I don't even know her. And she says, how do you kill babies? And it's like... And I started thinking, why should I take her seriously? It's like, well, we try to give them a little bit more lead, because they're quick.
I'm sure she appreciated that.
Oh, she didn't appreciate it. But, it's like, how long do we keep taking it?
Yeah, yeah.
It was weird the way they treated us. Virginia, I think they had signs, dogs and Marines stay off the grass. And I thought, when are we going to learn this lesson? These guys are called, and now they volunteer to do something that nobody else wants to do. Now they're treating them a lot better, which I totally appreciate.
No, they're definitely, it's definitely a different world for us coming home now.
Yeah.
So what'd you do when you got out?
I was totally drifting. I knew I wanted to start a business, but I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to. When I was younger, I was learning the contracting business. I was like a human wheelbarrow, I just, whatever they wanted loaded up, that's what I would do. So I got into contracting, and then went to school at night and built a business. I had a partner that I've been with ever since elementary school. So we built it up to about 60 guys. And then from there, I bought a woman's store for my sister who went through a divorce, and figured she needed an income. I bought a store for her, but it really didn't make enough money. So I ended up with 4 stores in the malls, and then I decided I would start manufacturing clothes. So it just kind of worked that way. And then I got a 300-seat restaurant, bar, entertainment. And everything was working just great. Living in a nice house, had the kids, wife's happy.
So what year did you meet Sally?
I met her before I went overseas.
Okay.
She was a car hop. And I remember watching her, and I just love the way she looked in those slacks, you know.
What's a car hop?
A car hop is back in the day, you would pull up at a restaurant in the parking lot, and the girls would come out, have little cowboy hats on and stuff, and they have the menus, so you eat right in your car.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
and
gotcha.
this is where a lot of the young guys would hang out, hang out in their cars and go out and check everybody's cars, and you know, it was just a real social thing.
Gotcha.
And I remember she bends down to take the order, and I see her face. And it was just weird. It was like her front teeth were just kind of turned in a little bit. And it just, I don't know, I just loved her face. And we knew each other for 5 years, on and off, on and off. When I came back, she was engaged to get married. But it was my fault because I thought that I was going to go to Vietnam, and the life expectancy was not good, sitting behind a 50 cal in a helicopter. So I didn't want her to waste her time. So I says, you know, why don't you go ahead and see other people? You know, I am, you know, so, you know, good luck. And I come back, and I find out she's engaged to get married. What was I thinking? And then I bumped into her at a party, and they just started over again, and it was nice. And
So she broke off the engagement?
Yeah.
Nicely done, George.
I've apologized to her for years. I'm so sorry.
Okay, so you're just basically an entrepreneur. You got restaurants, you got clothing manufacturing, you got a contracting, but you got all kinds of stuff going on.
Yeah, and we had a couple of race horses, which was a lot of fun. And it was good. And then
so you had Sarah first.
Sarah, and then we had Jim, and then Michael, and then Joe. Joe we almost had in the car. But that was funny. I got to the hospital, and the emergency side, it was at Long Beach Memorial, and at that time you had to park on a slope. And I just pulled the car up, and I ran into the hospital, and I said, my wife's having a baby, get ready. And I grabbed a wheelchair, and I go out there. And because we're on the slope, I'm trying to get her out, and the door keeps closing. And then, so I kind of moved myself around, and then I got my hand on the wheelchair. And I finally get her in, and she sits back, and then the weight pushes the wheelchair back. Crushes my hand. My hand is now right there down onto the asphalt, and I'm trying to get her back up so I can get my hand out. But it all worked out. We got her in there. As soon as we got her up to into the elevator, they were right there. They took her, and they told me to change my clothes. I ran in, and Joe was already born.
I want to read a section here from the book when Michael was born. You say this in the book: as they gazed upon their second son in the bright hospital room with his inquisitive brown eyes looking right back at theirs, his matted dark hair contrasting his fresh soft skin, George knew Michael was the right name for him. Sally wholeheartedly agreed. He was named after Saint Michael the Archangel, who in the Old Testament cast out of heaven all of the fallen angels led by Lucifer and condemned them to eternity in hell. He was a soldier full of strength and feared nothing. It was a perfect fit. The hospital staff performed their newborn well checks on little Michael, and after some time had passed, the pediatrician walked into their room. Mrs. Monsoor, Michael has jaundice, which is why his skin has a yellowish tint. It's caused by an excess of pigment Typically, because of an obstruction of the bile duct, you will be discharged today, but we will need to keep Michael and put him in an incubator until his levels get lower. Sally looked back at the doctor. She'd heard what he was telling her, but before she could help herself, she blurted out, "Doctor, I'm not leaving my son."
That was Sally.
The pediatrician thought for a few minutes as he could see the unwavering determination in her eyes and that she was adamant about not leaving him. "Well, Mrs. Monsoor, we'll let you take him home, but you have to agree to set a protocol of treatment in the home, including sitting with him by the window in the sun for 2 to 3 hours a day. If you follow our instructions and he continues to improve, he will not need to stay or come back to the hospital. Thank you so much. I will do everything you need," Sally replied. So there's Mikey arrives on the scene, and he ends up having asthma too.
Yeah, it was like from day one, Mikey's was like always had a problem. And we got through that, and his skin got better. And then as he got a little bit older, we realized he was having breathing problems. And then we found out he had asthma. But being Mikey, it's never just a little bit. I mean, it's always full blown. And it was rough for years.
Like the asthma?
Yeah. I mean, we would check on him every night, fearful that he would stop breathing. And he was just so small and so weak because he really couldn't exert himself. And he's looking at his brothers and his sisters, our sister, and they're just excelling. And he's just trying to keep up. They would race in the pool, and people are thinking they're swimming. But no, Mikey couldn't swim because he would get so exhausted moving all those body parts. So he would race them by hand over hand along the side of the pool. He would always compete. He would just find a different way to compete.
And again, look, this book is Defend Us in Battle. It's just an outstanding book. I'm reading small chunks of it, but the stories are just fantastic to read. This one, I must admit, I felt like I had to read this one here. It says, as he grew older, Michael was often the target of bullying at school as well as on the playground and began to hate it. He felt profoundly for himself the effects of someone victimizing someone less able to defend themselves in order for them to gratify their own desires. Even in his youngest years, he was keenly aware of the injustice that took place. One afternoon when Michael was around 9 or 10, his father took him to the racetrack to scout out some future horse prospects as their family raced thoroughbreds at the time. When they arrived, George began to chat with the trainer, and Michael ran off to play on the playset campground. As he played with the other children, George noticed 3 older boys pushing the other children around, including Michael. They made a show of it in an effort to demonstrate to all the children that they were in charge. They took over the only 3 swings and refused to get off any of them for the smaller and younger children to use. "Not your swing, it's mine now," they taunted the younger kids. George called Michael back to him and looked at his tear-filled eyes. "Come here, Mikey. I know those kids are being bullies, but not every wrong is yours to right. There's not always justice in the world. Sometimes you just have to move on," George told Michael. "Dad, what is justice?" Michael asked, his curiosity perked on hearing the new word. "Justice is getting or giving what is deserved, whether it's reward or punishment, Mikey," George responded to his son, whom he always called Mikey when it was just the two of them. George could see his son taking in his words, yet his son's question continued to cut through his thoughts as they headed to their seats to watch the horse race. He could see in Michael's eyes that the issue was not resolved. After the action-packed race, they returned to the area where they met the trainer. George asked Michael to stay nearby him and wait for him. But as soon as George was speaking with the trainer, Michael shot off to the playground with fire in his eyes. Those same boys were again back on the swings, taunting the younger children. Michael ran straight up to them from behind and ripped each boy out of their swing one at a time. He then sprinted up the play structure and began to climb the ladder that led up to the rocket ship that had multiple layers of slides and ladders. He knew if he could get to the top, only one bully could get to him at a time, and sure enough, they chased him right up after, and one by one, he kicked each boy backwards over and over as they tried to attack him. When he could no longer defend himself, he initiated his escape plan. He leaped through the top rocket opening down the slide and ran as fast as he possibly could back to his father. This time with the biggest grin on his face and eyes sparkling with excitement. He knew he was safe with his father by his side and had executed his plan perfectly. George and Michael got into their car to head back home, and George glanced across at his son, who sat in the passenger seat, victoriously grinning back at him. Dad, I think that's justice.
Yeah, when I was looking at him smiling, I was thinking who was smiling the most, because there was just this a special day for me, and I know he felt so good that he outsmarted the bullies, and that was just the beginning on him and bullies.
Yeah, that was like a sly move. You know, that was the thing about Mikey, is he was quiet, but you could tell he was plotting.
He was
plotting. So that was like the beginning of him plotting moves on
trying
people.
to figure something out. Yeah.
So you were doing good. I mean, going back to just family businesses, all this stuff going on. You were living in Anaheim Hills, which is a nice spot.
Nice view of the city, yeah.
And then economy hit.
Economy and the IRS.
Ouch.
And the IRS, back then, before George Bush Sr., they had carte blanche. They did what they wanted. And they would accuse you of something, and too bad. You had to abide by it. Well, I didn't owe them any money, and so I fought. And it was an 8-year battle. But that battle really wiped me out. And I won. I got a little piece of paper that says, George Monsoor versus the IRS, pay nothing. I might have been better off just to write them a check. But I was young. I think I was 30 or something, 31. And so I just, that's wrong, and I'm going to fight for it. And maybe I should have negotiated. But that kind of money, 600 plus penalties, like $800,000. Back in the 70s, you're talking about buying $7 or $8 million houses in today's market. Yeah. So anyway, I fought, and then it really crushed us business-wise. And it was amazing, really, how strong our family was, because we went from a pretty nice life to me coming home one day after the banks called me and said, I have been gutted, and I had $29 in my pocket. And it was kind of struck me as like, I thought I'd feel bad about it, but it was just the money was gone. I still had my family, and you just work around it. And my income definitely changed. Got a job working as a security guard, and I took the job because they paid every Friday, and I wanted to make sure my kids had groceries. And so I just did that until I put some deals together, and it took a while.
And you moved from Anaheim Hills down to this when you moved down to Garden Grove?
Yeah, and this area wasn't the best, but it was a good experience for my kids. Mm-hmm. And because they would see when they'd come to the factory with me. Factory was down in L.A., and that was a pretty rough area. And they would see looking out the window at some of these people had it really tough. And we used to have a bear of a man that would sleep in front of the door on the porch every night. And he wouldn't say anything to me. It was more of a grunt all the time, and he probably had some mental problems. He was just a huge guy. And I asked him, I says, are you sleeping here every night? And it was just a kind of a grunt.
Was this of your house?
No, this was at the factory down in L.A. And so I thought to myself, a guy that big, I got no problem with him sleeping here at night, because it was a rough area. So I would put blankets out for him. And he stayed there for years. Every morning I would come in, bring him a big breakfast burrito. He still hardly say anything, just grunts. And he would roll up his blankets and disappear all day. And then in the evening he'd come back. And the kids were fascinated with this guy. They wanted to be his friend, but he wasn't buying it. But anyway, they kind of saw that world. Now we're in an area where it's just a little bit of everything, a sprinkling of all kinds of nationalities, and it was a lower income area, and the kids were like, and from a nice, high school with all their friends are wealthy. They all go to Europe and all that stuff, which I didn't really like them around those kids all the time because I didn't want them to think this is the way it is. I wanted them to see the other side. So it was a good experience. And you've met my kids. You know they're good with whoever.
100%. They
just roll with whatever. And the whole family's that way. So it was good for them. Sarah wasn't thrilled with it.
Sorry, Sarah.
But she ended up, being a leader on the basketball team, and all of the kids did great in sports. And it was just all in all, I think it was one of the best things that happened.
Well, we've got I guess it's some kind of mythological thing in my family that started with when I was growing up at Christmas time. Apparently, my mother's dad, when Christmas would be coming, he would tell everyone it's going to be a lean Christmas. And so that's what my parents would tell us, like, hey, it's going to be a lean Christmas. And then, when I was raising my kids and I'm in the Navy and I got 3 kids, then 4 kids. Like, we didn't have any money. I've been telling my kids it's going to be a lean Christmas. And, we get I remember, we get used presents.
Yeah.
And I mean, I got my kids got used presents all the time. Used surfboards, used toys, everything was just used because it's going to be a lean Christmas. Yeah. But you got a story that when you moved down, I think it might have been the first Christmas down in Garden Grove where you guys didn't have any money. You were looking at a lean Christmas.
Yeah, it was lean.
And you got a story here about Mikey who goes out and I think he cut down, he didn't even have a Christmas tree. The deal was you guys were going to do no presents.
We were just going to have a nice dinner, and we just started to get back on our feet, and I had the deal fall apart on me at Christmas. And so my money's tied up, and I can't get it out. And I just said, look, we just moved into a house still in Garden Grove, but it was quite a step up. And Michael is one of those guys. He just kind of, okay.
He's plotting.
He's plotting. And so we wake up and we walk out, and there's this Italian cypress sitting in a bucket of dirt. And he put little sparkly things on there. There might even been some lights up. And there's little presents around it. And we're all coming in, he said, sit down, And he's giving us presents. And the presents were hilarious. I still have the rocks he gave me. Sally kept the scarf that he got with those throwaways at the racetrack. And the kids got fingernail clippers or little knives. And we just roared. It was just so funny in the way he presented them, And you're looking at your kids and you're thinking, these are strong kids. They get it, and they just roll with the disappointments. But it was a great Christmas. And then I remember when we're leaving the house, I don't know where we're going to go, but go out, and we get in the car, and you look in the front of the house, and it's that cypress. So you get 2 cypress on one side, you got a cypress and a half on the other. And neighbors are thinking, well, they're ever going to fix that? And no, it's a memory. I think that it wasn't fixed until somebody else bought the house.
And so everyone's playing sports. Mikey ended up playing hockey. How did he get into hockey? That's not the Southern California sport.
No, but for him, if it rolls, anything that rolls or slides, it was just him. I don't know. He was like, I remember the first time he was on skates, it was like I'm looking at this guy, he's jumping over stuff. Once he starts moving, it's like in his head, well, maybe I can do this, or maybe I can do this. It's like when we got him a bike. Next thing he's building ramps, seeing how high he can go. A ramps break, he crashes and burns. gets right back up and builds another ramp. In hockey, yeah, it surprised me, but he was still smaller than the other kids. And his edge was really how fast he was on wheels. And he just really liked the sport. He got his contact, but because he was on wheels, he could really hit these guys too, and he was quick. So if they hit him, he could come back, and he felt everything was equal. And he loved the game, yeah.
And then he also played football as well.
Yeah, he loved football, but he was he wasn't a big guy, but he had, he's one of those guys that had a lot of heart, always working, and he took it really serious. No one was going to run past him. He was the defensive end, and that was his territory. Even if he had to pull the guy's face mask, he was not going to go anyplace. I remember he did it, and he's double teamed, and I see his head reach out and grabs the guy's face mask, and I was sitting just right off in the bleachers. He could see me, and he looks at me like,
you got to do what you got to do.
Not on my side.
You got a section in here. You say Michael's team was getting pummeled by their counterpart junior varsity team, which included some of the varsity players.
Yeah.
One by one, the JV players on his team began to remove their helmets and quit, walking off the field in defeat and shame. They were not willing to be humiliated any longer in front of their family or friends during the Garden Grove football scrimmage. The clock sounded its loud horn for halftime, and each team jogged to their respective locker rooms. As George sat by his old 64 Gold Riviera.
I love that car. Michael ended up with it for a while.
And waited for the game to resume, Michael walked past his father with barely a glance in his direction. George watched curiously as Michael moved around the front of the car and opened the passenger door to get in. George, confused as to why Michael was not headed back to the field, looked directly at him. "What happened, Mikey? Why are you here?" Michael looked up at his father, his whole demeanor ripe with disappointment as he fought back tears. "Dad, they just quit. The referee canceled the game because too many of our players quit." "Dad, why would they quit? We still had a chance. We could have won." "Mikey, you guys were down by 50 points. "I know, Dad, but the game wasn't over yet. We had a chance." He hung his head, trying to fathom what had just transpired as he quietly repeated to himself, "They just quit. Quitting was not something the Monsoors did. They were always taught to follow through."
Yeah, we were. I mean, I had, when they wanted to play a sport, before I put them in that sport, we always had the same conversation. You join this team, you're here until the season's over. Whether you like the coach, or whether you play or not play, you do not quit. So they were raised that way. You make that decision, because I wanted them as children to understand they make these decisions, then they have to live by them. And they're just short little tests, but it was important that they started understanding. You just, on a whim, decide you want to play football. So he was raised like you don't quit. And a lot of those kids, it was hard on them because they were just getting wasted. I mean, there was no first downs. There was no completed pass. They were just totally outclassed. But Michael always figures there's always a chance. And if he would have got one touchdown, he would have felt like we have our dignity. So he didn't mind losing as much if he gave everything, but just to lose, that just wasn't Michael. He used to have a thing, bunk bed. He was on the bottom, and Joe was on the top. And even on his inside, when he woke up in the morning, there was a little message, never quit. And he carried that for his whole life. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was a believer in once you said it, then live with it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You go on to say here, Michael's lion-hearted determination grew stronger as he grew older. He played as a defensive end for the Argonaut varsity football team while he was in high school and was known for being one of the hardest workers on the field. Asthma continued to challenge Michael, but he was not going to let it dictate how he lived. Sally remembers how Santa Ana winds coming in from the mountains each fall would affect Michael's breathing. One afternoon, she opened the door to his bedroom to find him wheezing. She asked him why he wasn't using his inhaler. "I'm weaning myself off it, Mom." Although unable to fully rid himself of the ailment, Michael would not let it stop him from accomplishing what he set out to achieve. So he's just freaking tough.
He is. He's very determined, and I think all the way he was treated, when he was younger. Bullies they have a sense. There's the weak one. And he just made it his life not to be the weak one. I mean, I remember when he was in the 6th grade, he told me, he says, it's going to be over. He says, this will stop.
Oh, this is the bullying he's talking about?
He says, this will stop. And he just determined to get stronger. And even verbally, I mean, people didn't realize, if you know him, that his tongue was sharp when he wasn't, as strong, because he would go the other way and he would embarrass them. I mean, he had a very good mind, and he would just trash them. And they know that whatever they would do, he would take it. I've seen him take these hits knowing he'd come back and say, what happened? And, his brother would say, hey, those guys, went after Mike because he went after them verbally. And, he would fight, but he was just outgunned. But
smaller.
He never would back down, even when he was little. And he had to pay, all of them had to have discipline. We had rules in the family. And if he wasn't buying the rule, he would literally just, okay, I'll take the 2 days in my bedroom or whatever. And our bedroom, those bedrooms didn't have TVs and video games, but I never beef about it or anything. You just take his medicine.
There you go.
Yeah.
So he's playing football. How were his grades in high school?
Here's Michael. I don't know. Michael in the 6th grade, it was determined they had very high IQ. And it was determined because we had a meeting, and the teacher says, he just doesn't do anything. He ignores me, and he doesn't do his homework. And he goes, and look, as a matter of fact, there's his backpack. He doesn't even take it home. And he goes and gets it, and he says, you might as well take this home. And the backpack had all these papers in it. So he opens it up. The teacher opens it up, and he's looking at all the homework he did and the tests he took. And he goes, I think your kid's really pretty smart. And that's when they started putting him into the higher classes. And he was fine with it. But then he got towards the end of high school, he's bored. And I get a letter from the high school, a registered letter. It says, your son is all Fs, and he's not going to graduate. Eesh. Yeah. And I bring him into the office, and I say, you understand how this family works, right? I have my job. You have your job.
Wait, what's the office? This is in your house? You have the office?
Yeah.
This is where counseling takes place with the children?
Well, I spent a lot of time in there praying that I had some money in the bank. I just keep looking at it. No, it's still the same. And I says, how this works? I says, you have a job, and the job is to get through school. That's your job. And I said, you got straight Fs. They're telling me that you will not graduate. How do you think that's going to play out with me? And I said, you won't be living here. And you don't do your job, you don't live here. You're gone. And he just smiles. He says, don't worry, Dad. I got this. And boom, he turns it around, straight A's, all the way up. And then he smiles and he goes, I told you I got it. There's something about him that when he's bored, then he made it harder just to, test himself. And the things he did when he was young was always testing himself. It was almost like, since I had racehorses, it was like having a young horse that you didn't allow him to get out of the stall. And he just wanted to run and wanted to run. Michael wanted to run, but he couldn't. He just wasn't strong enough. And once he got stronger, he just wanted to run, and he did.
So he graduates from high school. What was his plan when he graduated from high school? Because he graduated in '99.
Yeah.
And
within a couple of years later.
Yeah. So what was he doing in the meantime?
His plan was to go into the military, but he wanted to have a good time before he went into the military. So he had a good time. And then I remember telling him, the good time's over. It's time for you to make a decision.
Was Jim in the Marine Corps at this point? Or had Jim already gone to the Marine Corps?
I can't remember. I think Jim was in the Marines. Yeah, he was in the Marines. Another one. that doesn't say anything to his dad. Hey, Dad, I'm going to join the Marines. What do you mean you join the Marines? He goes, well, I'm going in tomorrow. What? And I knew Michael was talking about going in. I had no idea that was his plan.
In the book, it says that it sounds like you're the one that had kind of told him about the SEAL teams, or he had asked you about it.
He asked me about it, and I remember because we would drop guys off and we'd do practice things, and being in the Marines you do with Navy guys, and then we had our recon guys, so we do a lot of the same things. You know, recon. Mm-hmm. Everyone forgot about recon. Anyway, so he was fascinated with it. You know, like any young kid, he wanted to hear about these guys. I had no idea what was going on in his head, and because he was so sickly, he's the last guy I thought that would be a SEAL. You know, and I always thought to myself, he's got a great mind, and he's going to be one of those eggheads, and I'm good with that. But his mind was not thinking that way. And I was really kind of taken back when I found out after he graduated from Navy boot camp. His instructor told me.
His instructor told you that he was going to try and be a SEAL? He
says, you got a great son here. He goes, this guy is great, and he's definitely SEAL material. And I go, what?
And is that the first time you knew that he was going to try and go to Buds, or he was going to Buds?
Yeah, he talked about SEALs, but I never really registered that he was serious about that. And you know, we teased him anyway because he went into the Navy because we were all Marines, whole family, all the way back to World War II Marines, and it was like I was good with it, Navy, but then the SEAL thing just caught me, like. You know, and I still remember he had that funny smile, like, yeah.
So he's in the Navy. He ends up at Buds, and Buds is what it is, and what it is freaking brutal.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go to the book here. It was now late fall 2001. The days were shorter. The air was cooler. Michael was exhausted and decided to head home for the weekend to get some much-needed rest in the midst of vigorous training. A lot of people don't know this. When you're at Buds, basic SEAL training, people think you get locked away on some island somewhere. No. You basically work Monday through Friday, and then weekends you recover.
Yeah.
But if you want to recover by drinking, you can do it. Yeah. If you want to recover by laying in bed and icing your knees, you can do that too. Yeah. It's kind of up to you. And Michael decided he was going to go home. So George knew something was wrong as soon as Michael returned home. Michael wasn't walking right, and as George looked down at his feet, he could see why. Michael's socks were bloody, and Michael was miserable. Michael, what are you doing? You're not going to make it like that. Dad, I'm not quitting. Michael, you can't even walk, and your feet are a bloody mess. You're leaving footprints all over the kitchen floor. I'm not quitting. Michael bandaged up his feet as best he could and headed back to Coronado to prepare for training the following day. The bandages did little to keep the sand out of the lesions on his feet, and every step he took was like running sandpaper across the open sores, bringing excruciating pain. Both feet were an absolute mess, yet Michael pushed on. The pain continued to build and was not only draining him mentally, but rapidly slowed his pace, affecting his ability to perform the required evolutions. He was disgusted with what had begun to creep into his conscious thought. He hated to see weakness in others, but hated it even more in himself. With every pain-filled step, it became clearer. He was forced to acknowledge what he had tried to ignore, the reality that he would not be able to continue. It was the 24th hour of the first day of Hell Week, the third week of the 6-month pipeline, and regarded as the most challenging week of Bud's training cycle, when students are expected to run upwards of 200 miles and are allowed only 3 to 4 hours of sleep the entire week. Michael stood up and did what he thought he would never do. He walked over to the notorious bell affixed to a pillar directly in front of the first phase office and rang it 3 times, alerting the whole compound that he was finished. Michael made a left face, walked achingly down the sidewalk that was already lined with helmets of those who had not made it to this point. When he reached the end, He made one more left face, took off his helmet, and placed it next to the others. He had quit. Dang.
He was devastated. I remember when he told me, and it's just, I mean, his eyes were just filled with tears. He just could not believe that he quit. He just couldn't believe it. And it was just so sad, and I didn't even have words. You know, I kind of didn't want him to be a SEAL. Well, I didn't want him to be a SEAL. But I knew how much it meant to him, especially at that moment. I just really didn't. I could remember how when they were kids, I would tell them, you know, it's your defeat, and how do you come back from the defeat? That's what makes you the man or the woman, is the way you come back. And I couldn't even remember that. I was struck by, he was just so sad. And so the next morning, he's up making some breakfast. And he says, remember when you say, and I go, yeah. He goes, yeah, I'm going to be a SEAL. And then it began. I mean, he was back on track, and he was going to be a SEAL.
So he ends up getting stationed, and again, like the book has so many good details of all this. Eventually, he ends up getting stationed in Italy, in Aci Trezza, and immediately, and he's with a couple other guys that are in the same boat he is in.
Yeah,
and man, that program's tough. So they began training. They began getting ready. They're swimming, they're running, they're cliff jumping, getting into some of this stuff here. For Michael and his friends, they were determined to push themselves as hard as necessary to train their bodies for the rigors of buds. They were getting a second shot, and they knew they were not about to blow it. They would do whatever it took to be ready this time around. Michael's most traumatic experience thus far in life was ringing the bell and quitting buds, and he would not be satisfied without a second chance to prove to himself that he could do it. He told his younger brother Joe that this second time around, they would have to drag his dead body off the beach before he would quit.
And that does not surprise me with Michael. It scared his brother. Joe was like, yeah, that could be true, Dad.
Got some good stories in here about Italy. They're in Sicily. They got nightlife. Michael's buying vehicles. He buys a Russian truck. He buys a Lancia. You say this. Michael also purchased a Lancia, an incredibly fast car with all-wheel drive, and used to cruise it all throughout Italy. The higher the speed, the better. Until one afternoon, when Ali, that's one of his buddies, got a call from Mike, he had crashed it racing an Audi. They were flying down the Sicily highway when Mike hit a wet spot and lost control. His Lancia spun and slammed directly into the concrete divider wall. Luckily, he wasn't hurt and was able to get it towed back to his home, but it was not looking good for the car. Ali drove over to Mike's apartment to see how he could help. First, he saw the car. It was totaled. Then he saw Mike, beer in hand, steak on the grill, and not a care in the world. It was good while it lasted, Mike said with his signature smile.
And that is Michael.
That is 100%. This is just another. Mike got so many accidents in Italy, he opted to pay $200 a day for extra car rental insurance just to cover the shenanigans. He liked freaking vehicles and cars and motorcycles.
That might have been my fault. I had a motorcycle when I was a kid, and I remember Sal always would get on, and then I would drive a little crazy, and she'd reach up into my shirt and pull my chest hairs out. But Mike, when he was little, we had a 64 GTO.
Oh, man.
And that thing, from a dead stop, or it would just scream, and Mike was just a little guy, and he'd hold on to the handle over the glove box, and he'd just go, Dad, go. And I'd burn through those gears, and fishtailing, and he's just in heaven, and then we had this long on-ramp to the freeway where you could kind of see the freeway before you got on, and you had this long ramp. And so he knew I could do it there, and I would. So I just burned through the gears, and the car's and he can smell the smoke from the tires. He's just a huge smile. Dad, we're going 100 miles an hour, you know. And it's like about half of that, Mike, give or take 50, you know. And then we get off it, but he just loved the acceleration, and I didn't realize that it would have such an effect because he loved fast stuff. Yeah, and he just did.
Yeah, including Lancias.
Yeah, so if parents read this, it's a great book for your children, except for, you know, that kid, slow it down a little bit. That might have been a mistake on my part.
Fast forward a little bit here. It says, as the 2 years came to an end, as he inched closer to heading back to Coronado for a second shot at buds, Michael felt strong and ready. Michael still contended with his severe asthma, which caused him to be rarely without his inhaler. But he would not concede to this ailment in any shape or form. One afternoon, as Chris, that's another one of his buddies, talks about, and Mike ran side by side on one of their last hard runs, Mike pushed himself harder and harder to beat his friend Chris. As Chris pulled ahead, a pissed off Mike grabbed his inhaler, chucked it across the road, and sprinted until he beat Chris and finished the run. That was the last time Chris ever saw Mike use his inhaler. He didn't have room for weakness. It was all or nothing this time around.
He was mentally ready for buds. It was like, bring it.
I mean, and it sounds like his attitude going in, obviously, you know what to expect. You don't want to make that mistake. Although, one of my roommates was a former buds quitter, and he was back again. And I was like, well, you know, he's probably he's a little older, you know, kind of. I was thinking, hey, you know, this guy's going to be good to go. But sure enough, first night of Hell Week, he quit. So there's still no guarantee. It's what you change in your brain.
Yeah, and he was more prepared. I remember, I think the last thing I said to him when he left was, watch the sand. Because that really destroyed him. He just didn't take care of himself that first time around. So he was definitely determined. He was in good shape, and mentally he was determined.
Yeah. He had a friend named Gabe Lynch.
Yeah.
And this kid was like an Oregon farm boy. So you had like the California kid.
Yeah.
They had some pretty good experiences that they talk about in the book, that you guys talk about in the book. It says, Gabe and Michael were both part of Boat Crew 3. They were close in height, standing just around 6'1". Gabe recalls how Mike was always one to brighten the mood of the guys during the often exhausting days of being beaten by the ocean surf while wet and sandy all day long. Gabe was the slower runner between the two of them, and he remembers Mike hanging out in the back with him as they would push through their 4-mile timed runs. He would encourage Gabe, then sprint back up to the front and finish easily in the top tier of runners every time. That was the kind of guy Mike was, always looking out for his buddies. He could see who needed a word of encouragement or action of support and would deliver it at just the right time. Sometimes that's all it took when a guy was delirious, running on a few hours of sleep for days on end. Even though Michael had not yet made it and become part of the SEAL Brotherhood, brotherhood itself was something he already understood in the depths of his core. He was not going to let his friends down.
And he was always that way. Yeah, when he was a little kid, when we were living in that other neighborhood, it was pretty poor, it wasn't uncommon for him to take Christmas gifts and give them away to his friends. I'd see his friends playing with the gifts. If you were his friend, and if you speak to his friends, they will say that he truly was a true friend, and he was always on their side, and that's just the way it was. So the brotherhood was perfect for Michael.
Perfect place.
Yeah.
The quick scene from Hell Week. Just because this sounded like Mikey, man. With paddles in hand, they begin to row in unison. They had just taken the first few strokes in an evolution aptly named Around the World, which entails paddling their small boats from San Diego Bay north through the channel around the tip of Coronado Island and back to Bud's Beach, a staggering 13 miles. As they paddled, Gabe couldn't hold back any longer. He started to doze off, and without missing a beat, Michael shouted over to him from his side of the boat, "Hey, man, I love you, bro, but you need to wake up." That's all it took to jar Gabe back to consciousness and help him focus. They end up securing Hell Week. They lost about 75% of their people. Obviously, Michael made it. Got Ray. It's just crazy. Ray Baviera, another guy from Tasking to Bruiser, they were the LPO of their Buds class. They're getting ready to go out to San Clemente Island, which is the third phase of training. It's the last phase of training. And before going out there, Michael planned a little boat trip. And again, I'm going to fast forward to this part just because it's funny to read about. Michael, being an avid adventurer, had planned a spearfishing trip and brought Gabe and another buddy of theirs, Chris Kimbrell, from their Buds class along for the weekend. Gabe knew how to spearfish like Mike, and they were naturals in the water. But for Chris, a Midwest landlocked boy, this escapade was not his forte. He was ready to go for it, though, and couldn't wait to see what the picturesque island had to offer. Chris was one of the first all suited up and couldn't wait to get going. Before Gabe had even dropped the anchor, Chris jumped in the water to see what he could find. Moments later, he burst through the surface, proudly holding up his spear. There on the end of his 6-foot Hawaiian sling flopped a beautiful orange fish. Chris yelled in triumph. Michael immediately dove to the water, tackling Chris as he pulled the spear from his hand. That's a Garibaldi, the state fish of California. It's super illegal to hunt, dude. Michael yelled at Chris. There were other fishing boats all around. Anyone could have seen the fish that Chris had on the end of his sling. Michael quickly snatched the fish from the tip of the spear and dove to the bottom. He found a large rock and wedge. So that's just like classic. Poor Chris Kimbrell, who's, a landlocked guy.
He didn't know.
He's like,
look what I got.
Yeah, this Garibaldi are everywhere. You see him, you're like, oh, this is easy hunting. Oh, it's classic. Third phase, the last remaining block, again, fast forwarded, the last block before graduating Buds entailed instruction on SEAL weapons and tactics, lasting around 8 to 10 weeks. The students covered land navigation, land warfare, ambushes and raids, patrolling, weapons handling, and marksmanship and demolition. Michael and his classmates were on San Clemente Island, focusing specifically on raids, ambushes, and demolition. San Clemente Island is a rocky, volcanic island off the coast of California with hardly any trees, lots of cactus, no natural fresh water, full of caves and caverns formed by gas bubbles in the lava when the island was molten mass. As the men focused specifically on ambushes and raids, Ray Baviera, who continued as Michael's squad LPO through third phase, recalls how Michael would find a way to make light throughout the arduous and non-stop evolutions, bringing humor to any situation, brightening anyone's mood. And that's something that everybody says that about Mike. Yeah. Like, no matter what's going on, he's just going to be sitting there, putting everybody back in a good mood.
Yeah, he thought it was actually important, especially if people are getting stressed out, like in Buds. You can see it on their faces. And he thought, he's seeing these guys are going on tilt, and, our family does that. A little quip, this and that, and he's always done that when things get real serious, and it kind of brings people down.
So it says third phase was coming to close just a few weeks later, and as the men prepared to graduate, they were discussing what gift to give the command in their memory. They all wanted to leave something in their name from Bud's Class 250 that was immovable and unique. They decided to give Basic Training Command an enormous boulder with their names engraved upon it. Now the class had to figure out how to track down a boulder, engrave it, and have it delivered to the command. Ray's wife, Maria, was back home in San Diego and took care of the logistics. What began as an idea quickly escalated into a 4-ton boulder that would have to be delivered by a crane and would end up costing $7,000 in change. Each guy was given the option to back out after the final pricing was determined, and not one guy did. They were all in this together. What the final gift became was something none of the Bud students would forget, and their memory forever lives on, etched into the boulder. That was engraved with the following words: "The actions of the few dictate the fate of many," by Alexander the Great. And it also says, "The secret to Buds is underneath this rock." So Buds classes give gifts to Buds, and depending on the class and what they do, some of the gifts are pretty awesome. Some of them are pretty lame.
Yeah.
I think my class gave a pretty lame. We gave a speaking podium.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, the story behind it was one of the instructors was up at the podium talking to us, and as he was talking to us, he got mad and he smashed his hands down on the podium, and the thing like exploded. It like broke apart in all these pieces, and he started yelling, and we all go hit the surf, and so we like had this special one made. And the funny part about that story is years later, I saw that guy, the guy that had smashed his podium and it exploded like he was the Incredible Hulk. And I said, he was a Master Chief by this time. And I go, hey, Master Chief. And he's like, And I go, when, because he was a hard dude. I go, when my class was going through and you were the dive phase chief, I said, you smashed your hands on this podium and it like exploded. I said, was that like a set, was like a trick thing?
Setup.
And he looks at me and he goes, negative. It was oak, reinforced. And I was like, okay. So people give these various different gifts, and people give some stuff's really cool. Yeah. Probably the most famous one is the creature from the Black Lagoon. It's a life-size statue of the creature of the Black Lagoon, and it says, so you want to be a frogman, a little sign hung on it. But this was an awesome gift. It's this massive freaking rock.
Yeah, it's going to be there for a while.
Oh, it's not going anywhere. And so that's what they gave.
I didn't see that until Ray showed it to me. We were invited to watch Hell Week with the SEALs. We watched it from on top of a roof on one of the buildings, and then I feel so sorry for those guys. It was like those poor guys. People should just see that, knowing these guys are doing it because they want to do it. It's just amazing what they go through. But after that, then he showed me the rock. I knew it was there, but I never really, I just, there's a rock, and then he went over and showed me, and it was nice. And I could see where they were rubbing on the names, and obviously they were rubbing a lot on Michael, so it was kind of nice.
No, it's awesome, and it's in a really prominent spot. It's like as you leave the compound to go to the beach or come back, you go right by the rock. Michael graduated BUD/S on September 2nd, 2004. Back on Coronado Island, California. The graduation day was memorable for all. The men stood proudly in their clean, crisp-dressed uniforms, and each waited in anticipation for their name to be called. Across the compound, a giant crane labored with a 4-ton boulder, carefully placing a large rock in the much deliberated position where its weight would not crush the buried utilities below it.
A little tricky.
Michael's parents, George and Sally, as well as 3 siblings, Jim, Sarah, and Joe, were in attendance to celebrate the achievement. George recalls the smile on Michael's face as he walked up to embrace him following the ceremony. He had this look on his eyes that seemed to say to me, Dad, I hope you didn't doubt me. I told you. I was going to do this, and I did it. I told you so. I loved seeing him like that. It gave me so much joy. I never wanted him to join the SEALs, but I was so proud to be proved wrong by my son.
I love it when my kids prove me wrong, because it's kind of a challenge. I say, I don't think you can really do that, I don't know if you could do that. And I love it when they come to me and say, I did it, and you don't know nothing. And I'm sure they catch on, but to see my kids stick to something, all of them, and then they accomplish it, it's just, your dad. And you feel great.
Yeah. How did you feel when you got through Hell Week the second time? You must have been like, okay. Thank God.
It was funny. I kind of, though his attitude, I really would have been surprised if he didn't, because he had these friends too. And once he makes these friendships, he's going to be with them and push them through. So I would have been more surprised if he didn't make it.
Yeah, that's the wild thing. I mean, you start out with a couple hundred kids in your class. They're quitting so fast that you don't even know what's happening.
Yeah.
And so you got to be a little bit careful, because if you get to know someone kind of while you're there and all of a sudden they quit, that all of a sudden you go, I'm alone. So for him to have some good friends rolling in there is definitely nice. And got another guy here. Michael and Z went through all of BUDS together. They graduated BUDS, Basic Airborne SEAL Qualification Training, now assigned to SEAL Team 3, Z to Echo Platoon, and Mike to Delta Platoon. The weeks were busy training, and the weekends were spent riding their bikes, and that's motorcycles, by the way, chasing girls, hanging out with the guys. After a day of riding, they'd often come back to connect and unwind at Bar Dynamite, a small bar in Mission Bay where they'd grab drinks with friends, including Gabe and another freshly minted SEAL, Tommy D. Mike was living life to the fullest. He was renting this house in Mission Bay, while the new guys like myself lived in one small one-bedroom apartment, said Z, laughing. A motorcycle and a Stellar pad were not the only things Michael set his sights on. He was eyeing his next car, and he knew exactly what he wanted. Just received a contract bonus that he used to buy a silver 2004 Corvette Z06.
Yeah. Michael could never be a financial advisor.
This is like the classic thing I tell guys not to do when they get their bonus. I used to be like, hey, listen, don't go buy a Corvette. Don't go buy a Ford 350 Super Duty Harley Davidson. Don't do that. No. It's hard to talk them out of it.
I know, especially with the junkers that Mike had.
So he's got that. Mike was living the dream in Southern California, but he also understood his team was on short fuse to surge into combat areas in the Middle East. He knew the coming months would include a fire hose of information and intense training. His platoon was going to war, and how fast he learned and integrated into platoon and his role could mean all the difference.
Yeah, he took that real serious. When he was home, he was studying. Mm-hmm. He definitely he got to the point where I do not want to make a mistake. I mean, it was like he really wanted to make sure that he was on it.
Yeah, and it was so long ago for me. Like, when you're a new guy, there is so much stuff to know, and you don't want to make a mistake. Everyone's watching you, and you just want to do good, and you're going to be counted on. You know, these guys are going to be counting on you. So, and we also had a condensed workup because at the time the war was hot and heavy. This is now 2005 going into 2006. Used to be 18 months to train and get ready to go on deployment. Well, for us it was 6 months, 12 months. Boom, and you're out the door. So everything was compressed, and there was a lot of stuff being forced down the throats of everybody. And there's a story in here about the Roger that, which so I'm talking to the new guys, and it was a particular block of training where it's close quarters combat. The instructors it's live fire and close quarters, which means you're shooting right next to guys, right? You know, you're 2 feet from someone, you're shooting 12 inches off their muzzle. It is tight quarters. It's super dangerous. And so you got to be heads up, and the instructors have to be really hard to make sure that you don't mess anything up. And so I had took the new guys and said, listen, when you're going through this block of training, those instructors tell you something, your response is Roger that. I don't want to hear like, well, I was thinking this, or I could have done what I didn't see. No, you don't say any of that. When the instructors talk to you, you say Roger that. And so we're going through this training, and as we're going through this training, you know, I'm friends with all the instructors, because all the instructors are like, oh, we're all friends, but the new guys don't really know them that well. But finally, one of the instructors, he's a Master Chief, he comes up and he goes, hey, Jocko, what's up with this Monsoor guy? And I didn't really know something was wrong. And I go, what do you mean? Mikey's, he's good to go. He's like, well, what's up with his attitude? And I go, what do you mean? Well, what's wrong with his attitude? And he goes, every time I tell him something, or one of the instructors tells him something, all he does is look up at us and say, Roger that. That's all he says. And I go, hey, bro, I told him that's all he's supposed to say, and he's just following that to a T. That's what he's doing.
And when he would say that, the guys that he's with are like kind of smirking, like no one knew if he was a smart ass or he's just following your orders.
I'll tell you. So here's another similar story. We're in the Humvees, and we're going through the block of training with Humvees, and the gunners call out, like clear right, like you come up to an intersection, and the gunners, which is Mikey, call out clear right or clear left. And you know, Mikey's up there, and I'm the vehicle commander, so I'm sitting in the passenger seat, and he's up there, and like we get to our first time doing it, and we come up to an intersection, and he's like, clear right. I could barely hear him, you know, and I look down at him, or I look up, and I kind of hit him on the leg. I was like, hey man, you got to sound off. And he goes, roger that. Next intersection, we pull up to it, and he's like, clear right, super overcompensating. And I thought to myself, hold on a second.
Yeah.
Is he being a wise ass? And then we pull up the next intersection. Clear right. And here's the thing. He wasn't being a wise ass. I told him to freaking sound off.
If you want it, you will get it.
I got it. but that was you know, that attitude, that Roger that attitude, man. That's that was it. You know, that was he was gonna get it done. One of the first blocks of training workup was land warfare out at Nyland, California, by the Salton Sea with 107-degree summer average. It's a scorching place to train, and sure enough, we were out there in the summertime. This, combined with a schedule of rocky mounted terrain scarred with washes, makes the literal and figurative crucible of the workup. Here's where the platoon will work on the tactics, techniques, and procedures of fighting in open terrain, as well as demolitions, rockets and mortars, and all the different small arms weapon systems of the SEAL arsenal. A platoon is normally made up of 16 to 20 operators, each having a specific role to include snipers, breachers, communicators, and automatic weapons gunners, to name a few. Although specialized within the platoon, each man is still responsible to be proficient at the other jobs. Michael and the other new guys could not wait to jump right in and get started. Michael caught on very quickly, especially with his automatic weapon, the Mark 48. Each of the new guys were being watched closely by the older men in the platoon. His LPO Doug Wallace remembers how that even though Michael was quickly picking up on the tactics and performing all tasks efficiently and without complaint, it was always with humility and a willingness to learn more. Misery loves company, and Nyland is a block where there's many reasons to complain of our intense conditions. Mike never did once, not one time. It showed great character and understanding on his part, especially for a new guy, Doug said. And then there's another section in here. So there's like a little gang mentality going on, and part of it is like you're going to fight each other sometimes.
Yeah.
So they're having some boxing matches, and I'm using that term very loosely.
Yeah, they're not professionals.
They're not professionals, but they'll set up like a tournament, and generally or oftentimes it's just the new guys have to fight each other. Yeah. So this is going down, and it says here, it came down to Mike, the last standing new guy from Delta Platoon. So in Task Unit Cruiser, there's two platoons, Charlie and Delta. It came down to the last standing new guy in Delta, which was Mike, versus Kevin Lace, the final remaining new guy in Charlie. Kevin was huge, 225-pound tower of muscle who loomed over most team guys at a height of 6'3". Mike was much smaller and more slender, but he wouldn't give up. He was a lean, scrappy dude, recalled Kevin. I remember hitting him as hard as I could, but there was no shaking him. We had no boxing form. We were street fighting at that point with boxing gloves on. I looked at him, and it seemed as if his eyes were crossed, and I continued to hit him over and over again, but he wouldn't stop. He returned blow after blow right back. We got so into it that I'm sure we were both seeing red, but each of us refused to back down. Both platoons cheered and taunted as each man hit the other over and over again. Clad in only their boots and camo pants, the two men continued to brawl. Neither could defeat the other, and in the end, the older men called it a tie. Kevin hugged Mike once they stopped and cooled down. "You're a tough son of a bitch, Mike," Kevin said, laughing. Yeah, and Kevin Lace is just like a giant dude, thick. And there's Mikey. And Mikey, he got jacked later, but at this point, just coming out of buds, he was pretty lean still.
Yeah.
Even though,
yeah, he was.
Yeah.
There wasn't. He wasn't a real big guy when he just got out. He was definitely lean though.
Yeah.
And endurance-wise, the guy could go for a long time. But mentally, I'm not surprised that he hung in there because he went through those mental things as a kid, people messing with him and stuff. Mentally, he was just really very strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing. We're going through this workup. We do land warfare. We do mobility. We do close quarters combat. We do urban warfare at Fort Knox, or we used to do it at Fort Knox. We do diving, we do jumping, we do a bunch of stuff back in San Diego, and we're working hard. That's what we're doing. And we actually, at the beginning of our training cycle, we, as Task Unit Bruiser, didn't know where we were deploying to.
No.
Because there was 3 task units. One of them had already been designated to go to Iraq because they went to the Pacific the last time. So it was between my task unit and another task unit to see who was going to go to Iraq. Of course, everybody wants to go to Iraq. Everybody wants to go fight. The other platoon's going to do a different mission, but it's not fighting.
It was the Philippines, I think.
It was.
Because I said to Mike, I says, well, maybe you get lucky and go to the Philippines. He looked at me like, you poor pathetic old man. No.
Yeah, exactly. So no one wants to go to the Philippines. No one wants to go to the Southeast Asia. Everyone wants to go to Iraq. And it's basically the commanding officer is going to pick. And we pushed hard. And we were supposed to go to Baghdad. Our original deployment was to go to Baghdad. And there was a mission in Baghdad that was working directly with this group called the Iraqi Counterterrorism Force, the ICTF, Iraqi Counterterrorism. These are local, Iraqi guys, and they had been really well trained. They're probably the best trained of all Iraqi troops. They had really nice gear. They had uniforms, like they had everything. Yeah. And there was a group of SEALs with them, and there was a group of Army Special Forces guys, all working with these Iraqis. And I actually went on a pre-deployment site survey, we call it. I went before we went on deployment to go and meet up with those guys, see what the mission was like, get a heads up on everything. Because that's where we were going to Baghdad. So I come back from that. We're prepared. We know what our mission is. And everyone goes on pre-deployment leave. So everyone goes, like, hey, we're okay, we're going on deployment soon. And that's when we got the whole deployment changed around. And my commanding officer calls me in. He's like, hey, you guys aren't going to Baghdad anymore. You guys are going to go to Ramadi. And, well, Ramadi, we knew Ramadi was the worst place in Iraq. And everybody wanted to go there. Just like everyone wanted to go to Iraq, everyone wanted to go to Ramadi. The commanding officer said it to me like I was going to be sad. Now, the mission in Baghdad was a cool mission too. And it was kind of all set up and running. So it was like ready-made. Like, you know what you're going to be doing. Ramadi was kind of the Wild West still. But when he said it to me, he was making it seem like he needed to convince me that, hey, this is what's going to happen. Are you okay with that? And I was like, I realized the tone of his voice. I was kind of like, well, sir, I'm going to need some more people. I'm going to need some more gear. We got some stuff out of him. Yeah. But he was great. And then we reshuffled and got ready to go. And I don't even think we notified the guys because everyone was on leave. And you couldn't tell them like on a non-secure net like, hey, we're going to Ramadi now. Like it's classified. So everyone came back. We had another week or whatever. It's like, hey, everyone, we're not going to Baghdad anymore. We're going to Ramadi. And the guys were ecstatic. They're ecstatic. And some of the stuff you cover in the book. Sarah and Sally come down to help Mikey pack up all of his stuff. He takes his mom for a little ride in the Corvette. Got to read about that one.
He did it on the motorcycle too. Oh. But she was used to the bike with me when I used to take her on my bike. So he was kind of disappointed because she
didn't get scared.
No, she was. That was a nice ride, Mikey. Have a nice day and be careful.
He goes up to Garden Grove, spend the last couple days up there, and I'm going to read this. The time had come. George and Michael awoke early in the morning and drove back down the I-5 south to San Diego. The trip seemed to pass much faster than either would have liked. Once they arrived in Coronado, George gave his son a big final hug as he said goodbye with a kiss on the cheek. George felt a knot deep down in his stomach, but he refused to acknowledge it. The idea that this could be the last time he saw his son was not something he wanted to think about. As George drove home, he recalled an evening with his son from 2 weeks prior. He had lit up a Fuente cigar for Michael and himself on their front porch. They sat together in silence amid the cool air under the dark sky while smoke slowly drifted in the light breeze. George's voice broke the silence to address what they were both thinking. Mikey, what if something happens to you? It's not exactly a walk in the park over in Ramadi right now. Please don't be a hero. Just do your job. Dad, no matter what happens, I have no regrets. This reassurance from Michael helped, but George still did not want Mike to go. As a Marine vet, George saw firsthand what war did to all of those involved, and he despised it. He knew it was unforgiving and brutal and how it could degrade and break the spirit. He also knew that Mike had been trained well by men who understood what he could be facing. This brought some consolation to George. As they finished their cigars together that night, George looked at Mike and the man he had become. He was so proud of him, from a determined little boy who fought against the injustice of bullies and his own physical weakness of asthma. He persevered and overcame failure, adversity, and blocks of training he despised, such as free fall parachuting and communication school, all with focused conviction and often a mischievous smile on his face.
He definitely surprised me at that age, his maturity, and he knew who he was. You talk to kids at his age in their early 20s and stuff like that, and they're still lost. He had his morals, he had his beliefs. He's pretty rock solid. And if there was things that he didn't like, I remember like jumping out of planes. Mm-hmm. I used to do that too. And he talked to me about it, and then he says, I don't like this. I don't like it at all. And he says when he came back, he planned on just doing that. Mm-hmm. Because anything that he was afraid of, he would just keep doing it till he owned it. And that's just the way he was. Mm-hmm.
And he didn't like communication school.
No, it was hard, and he was studying all the time. And he says, God, I can't screw this up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Going to the book, Mike loaded up his gear and followed his teammates to the waiting C-17 aircraft. The C-17 multi-purpose aircraft can be configured for transport of troops, cargo, or a combination of both. This last configuration is often how Special Operations Unit travel due to the small footprint and nature of their mission sets. TU Bruiser was no exception, and as soon as the aircraft was at altitude, Michael and his friends broke out their nylon hammocks and ground pads and settled in for the long flight. Task Unit Bruiser landed at Al Taqaddum Airport in Iraq, where they began to prepare for a short flight west to Ramadi. After the C-17 was unloaded, each operator opened his war box and donned his combat equipment. Michael had done this hundreds of times throughout workup and his prior training trips. This time was different. This was not training. His enemy was now hardened warfighters whose will and resolve would be used to exploit weakness in order to win the war. It says here, in the spring of 2006, the Battle of Ramadi was just beginning, and it was already intense. The city was inarguably the epicenter of the insurgency in Iraq and known throughout the area as the most dangerous city in the world, wrote Leif Babin, the officer in command of Charlie Platoon, Task Unit Bruiser. The al-Qaeda leader in Iraq, Abu Musab Zarqawi, declared during that time that Ramadi would be the capital of his envisioned Islamic Caliphate in Iraq. Insurgents controlled over 2/3 of the city itself, and certain areas were nearly impenetrable to United States and Iraqi security forces. U.S. Marines and Army soldiers that were currently over there battled continually with large groups of well-armed and well-organized enemy fighters. So far, 93 U.S. service members had been killed in action, and hundreds more were wounded in nearly 15 months of fighting.
You remember Michael Fuente, I think his name was?
Yep.
He was telling me that the media would not even cover that. No. He was the only guy. He says they were just blowing those guys away and nobody would go.
the media. So my previous deployment was in Baghdad. There was like hotels with CNN and all the
They're
news
all set up. Yeah.
Ramadi, there wasn't anybody.
No,
there wasn't anybody. And I just had a guy on the podcast named David Bellavia. He's a Medal of Honor recipient from Fallujah. He was in the second Battle of Fallujah when the Marines pushed through.
Yeah.
And he's one of the few people that did go to Ramadi as a journalist. And we're sitting here. His story. You know about the second Battle of Fallujah.
Yeah.
It was a brutal fighting. And David Bellavia sits here and says, "Oh, Ramadi was way worse." Which, look, I'm not trying to compare the two.
No, but
they were
Fallujah,
both.
yeah, Fallujah,
but they were
I remember
both
that story.
Yeah.
Those stories. Yeah, I felt so bad for those Marines, and then Ramadi, Michael would tell me that he told the family that he was just teaching the guys how to march.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we could see the news every once in a while, or when the pictures came out on the internet, Fuente, when he had those pictures out, he was out there taking pictures, and we saw him on the internet, and it's like, is that Mikey's?
That doesn't look like you're training people how to march.
Yeah, I don't see anybody marching. Not other than some guys. Then they're not marching.
They're
they
running.
got their weapons out. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so it was basically on as soon as we got there. One of the indicators of that was the couple days after. So I'd already been there for a little while with a few of the guys. Just we got there before the rest of the task unit, but as soon as the whole task unit was there, within a day, I think it was like the night they got there, we had like a little attack on our base. And we end up, the whole freaking task units on the roof of our building lighting up and engaging, the enemy fighters out there. And it was like, okay, that's what it is.
Yeah.
That's how it's going to be. Almost within a couple days of being there, I was going to meet the brigade commander, a guy named Colonel Gronsky. And I was literally walking in to meet him. And as I'm walking in to meet him, we had already put out a sniper overwatch position. And Tony Afrati, the Charlie Platoon chief, had shot and killed an IED and placer in an area where the Marines had just hit a big IED and lost a bunch of guys. And as soon as that happened, Colonel Gronsky looked at me. I mean, so that's how I meet him. He says, "I think your guys just killed an IED in placer where I just lost Marines." "Hey, roger that, sir." He says, "We need you out in eastern Ramadi, a place called the Malab, out Corregidor." And I said, "Roger that," and that's what we did. As soon as I get back, we plan, all right, well, they need us in eastern Ramadi. And I took probably 2/3 of the task unit over to Camp Corregidor, where the 506 is. Again, as soon as we get, look, we've been on the ground for like a couple days. Now maybe it's been like 6 days and we're over there. We get to Camp Corregidor. The snipers are like, "Hey, can we get in the towers? Because there's towers around Camp Corregidor." I'm like, "Absolutely." Tell the Army guys, "Are you good with us putting snipers?" Colonel Clark's like, "Absolutely." Yeah. They start killing guys almost immediately. Enemy rocket teams, mortar teams, IED emplacers. And at the same time, we're out at Camp Corregidor for a couple days, the living conditions are terrible out there.
Living the life, I heard.
It was like dirt floors. There's mosquitoes. They're getting mortared, indirect fire on a regular basis. It was just freaking horrible. No showers. It was horrible. And so we do this initial mission out there, and we come back to the bigger base, and the Army's like, "Hey, thank you for coming. Can you keep working with us?" As a matter of fact, their company commander, these guys went out on patrol, and this company commander with an Army company commander, he comes back after his first patrol with my guys. And I walk with him to the battalion commander, and he tells the battalion commander, "I don't want to do another patrol without SEALs with me. I want SEALs on every patrol." So Colonel Clark's looking at me like, "Hey, well, can you get some guys out here?" I said, "Let me sort it out." So now I'm talking to Seth, And, you know, Seth's like, hey, I want to pick the guys to go back out there. Cause however it all shook out, Seth was the opportune guy, or he had the Leif had already been assigned a guy. This guy had already been assigned Iraqi troops to work with. Another guy had been assigned Iraqi troops to work with. I think the Iraqi troops Seth was supposed to work with originally quit. Like, they didn't show up. And so Seth was the guy that had the capacity. So I said, all right, you're going to go out to Camp Corregidor. And he says, I just want to pick the guys I want to take. And I said, hey, man, it sucks out there. I said, how about we do this? Let's put a volunteer list up. And if anybody wants to go back out there, then you can get volunteers. That way you're not forcing it down their throats. And Seth's like, all right. So bring the task unit together. And I'm like, all right, guys, you all just came back from Camp Corregidor. We're going to send an element out there for deployment. All I can tell you is it's going to suck. The living conditions are awful. The level of violence is extremely high, as you all saw. And if you want to go back there, then put your name on this list on the whiteboard. And I walked out of the room, and I came back 15 minutes later, and everybody's name was on the list, including Michael's, which meant that Seth got what he wanted, which was he just got to pick his guys. Yeah. And Mikey was one of the guys. There's no question he was going with Seth.
Yeah, that would have surprised me if he didn't.
Yeah. No, so there was Seth and Tommy D and Mikey were real tight. So I knew that those three were gonna stick together.
Though he didn't care. Seth was a little shocked at Michael's decorating. I remember when he got back, he was telling me about his pad.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the good news. The good news is once they got over there and settled in, and we'll get to that part, but they eventually squared away, which SEALs are really good at. SEALs good at. We got some rough living. We'll fix it up. Yeah. But so they end up taking this small element of guys out there to go to Camp Corregidor, move in there, working with the 1st of the 506. The Band of Brothers, which was awesome. And they get settled into this operational tempo and settled into really what it is that they're going to be doing there. And I'll just example of this. They get settled into what they're doing there, get settled into the combat operations, and real quickly, we go to the book here. The Army captain sat peacefully in silence in one of the only places set apart from the chaos and violence that was now Ramadi, Iraq. He was a little old for the rank of captain, but that was not uncommon for a person with his specific duties in the military. He had spent years in formation and training and was now here in the thick of battle in Ramadi. The quiet was broken by a firm knock at the door. The man rose from his seat and moved to receive it. He opened the door to find a tall, brown-eyed, dark-haired young man patiently waiting. "Are you a Catholic priest?" "I am," replied Father Halliday. "Nice to meet you. I am a Catholic, and my name is Michael Monsoor. I'd like to go to confession." Father Halliday grabbed his stole and motioned Michael to follow him. Father Halliday was 40 years old at the time of his deployment to Ramadi and was an Army chaplain with the 1st of the 506th. His main mission was to assist the soldiers of Camp Corregidor to worship according to their own religion and preference, but was an ordained Catholic priest and was happy to oblige Michael's request for confession. They sat down in the makeshift chapel. Michael had just arrived in Ramadi, and Father Halliday understood well the situation the men were facing on a daily basis. He thought it showed significant religious formation and conviction for Michael to seek him out after only recently arriving in Ramadi.
Yeah, Michael, he took his faith serious, and he also, he knew he was in a place where he could lose his life, and he wanted to be prepared everywhere, spiritually, physically, mentally.
Yeah, and the fighting was sustained urban combat, and guys were getting wounded or killed just about every day. And the 1st of the 506, Charlie Company, the 1st of the 506, who Mikey spent a lot of time working with, they had like a third of their company casualties in 4 or 5 months. So they 50 guys they were down. Not all of them were killed, but it was it was war.
Yeah. Well, when we were in Fort Campbell, and their commander brought in some of the guys that worked with Michael, and their stories, you know, and it's like you start realizing how many people they did lose, and just how tough it was. And I remember Sally breaking down, hearing some of those stories and thinking about Michael. So it was, people just don't get it, how tough it was over there.
Some of what they were experiencing here. They were in the middle of intense firefights on almost daily basis. The operating tempo they were facing required hyper focus, and the guys, completely undeterred, stepped up and went to work. We asked a lot of our guys, especially with the numbers of missions we were conducting, while facing extreme heat, dehydration, and exhaustion. It didn't faze them. They all stepped up and performed. Mike Sorelli said there were Army and Marine units also stationed in Ramadi that the SEALs were providing assistance to, and one of the large Army battalions being the 1st of 506. This was the descendant from the Band of Brothers from World War II. The battalion was huge and led by Lieutenant Colonel Ron Clark. His men were professional, talented, and worked incredibly well with the SEALs. Michael's troop commander, Lieutenant Commander Jocko had instructed his men to use the Army's uniform, a tricolor gray digital pattern called Army Combat Uniform, or ACUs. It was very different from the tricolor Desert Naval Special Warfare uniform. The men wore it and even shaved their heads to match their Army brethren. This not only increased the cohesion of the two units, but also had a very practical purpose. By blending in with the Army unit, the SEALs did not stand out as special forces. The enemy had begun to target soldiers that looked or dressed differently than the average. So that's why when people see pictures of that element, they're wearing Army uniforms. That's what it is. They wanted to blend in, and wanted to not stand out, and wanted to form a relationship with the Army. You know, there's just sometimes in special operations, you can wear all this Gucci gear, and it's like you're trying to set yourself apart, and we didn't want to do that.
How often does that happen where I see you guys working with the Marines, but working with the Army? Is that something that's unusual or not unusual?
I would say it's not unusual.
Yeah.
To this amount, on this much of a relationship, working all the time, is a little less common. But I mean, that whole deployment was, we didn't do any missions. Well, we did barely any missions where we weren't with an Army or Marine Corps unit, or at least adjacent to them. We were definitely adjacent to them.
Yeah.
But yeah, the ACU thing, that was because those guys were living with them, and we just figured, let's just win in Rome.
Yeah.
Starting to get into this a little. The order of battle for the SEALs would largely consist of word coming from the Army 48 hours ahead of time, informing them on what area of Ramadi they would be patrolling. The SEALs would then plan and provide sniper overwatch during the Army patrol. Even amid their overloaded operating schedule, the men of Delta Platoon gathered supplies to build a home away from home in the tattered building where they would be spending the deployment. They nicknamed it Full Metal Jacket. So the building that they lived in called Full Metal Jacket. And if you've seen the movie Full Metal Jacket, that's what this building looked like. A bunch of Army guys living in there too. A plywood floor was laid. The walls were reinforced with sandbags. Foam was sprayed between the inner and outer layers for insulation. They framed and built out rooms for each man and installed a small AC unit to cool the air. In certain parts of the building, the men needed to watch their step in order to avoid exposed rebar. The heat was miserable in May, reaching upwards of 115 degrees, and fixing up and finishing Full Metal Jacket was a welcome reprieve. The men of Delta Platoon had this once barely standing building a home away from home. By normal standards, nothing to write home about, but nonetheless a haven in the midst of the heat. Yeah, and that's where Mikey built Mikey's little palace.
Yeah, he had.
And just to, we were talking about this was probably a month in, and I had the the Army Special Operations Commander came to visit Task Unit Bruiser. And I was briefing him on what was going on. And I said, my element in Corregidor has been out their last 23 missions. They've been engaged by the enemy 23 straight missions in a row. And as I'm saying that, almost as if on cue, one of the guys from my tactical operations center comes in and says, "Excuse me, sir." And I'm like, "Yes." And he says, "Just to let you know, the guys in Corregidor are in contact with the enemy right now." And I looked at the CJSOTF commander and I said, "Well, sir, make that 24. That's to go out 24 operations in a row and be in enemy contact. It's what you were talking about earlier." Mm-hmm. And I remember actually the 25th operation, I think it was the 25th operation, they didn't have enemy contact, and it's because they did something like really small and they broke their streak. But it was on. And again, you interviewed a bunch of people for this. The deafening noise of machine gun fire suddenly erupted from an enemy insurgent position to the right. Michael dropped into his field of fire, identifying the enemy position, immediately sent back a long burst with his Mark 48. "Contact right," multiple SEALs yelled as they sent round after round toward the enemy. Mike sprinted to the closest position to cover, which was a courtyard wall of a nearby house, and picked up fire. The other SEALs and the Iraqi Army scouts moved into the courtyard and began returning fire as well. "Changing," yelled Mike as he stripped out an empty ammo box and loaded a full one. Just as he closed the feed tray cover, 5 enemy fighters moved to flank Michael and his team. "They are flanking to the west," Mike yelled as he fired at the maneuvering insurgents. He caught them halfway through their movement and had them pinned behind a small vehicle. "Hold them there, Mike," JP yelled. Mike could overhear the Marine Air Naval Gunfire Liaison Company, Anglico guys on the radio setting up for a strike on the enemy fighters he had pinned down. "CAS in 30 seconds. Called out the controller, letting the guys know the jets were 30 seconds out from dropping. For Michael, this seemed like an eternity. He had the best vantage point to keep the enemy where they were, as the other SEALs and scouts were still engaging the original enemy position. He conserved his ammo, knowing a reload may give the insurgents just enough time to maneuver away from their current position, which could cause the close air support strike to have to abort and start over. He continued to send 5 to 8 round bursts into the vehicle. "One away, 10 seconds to impact," called out the controller. The dust was heavy, but Michael could still see to know that none of the 5 enemy had left the position. Suddenly a flash, then the car ripped apart and disappeared in a cloud of black and gray smoke. "Good hit, stand by for BDA," stated the controller over the radio. The dust cleared. Where the sedan used to be was a crater with indistinguishable metal debris and other materials scattered in the area. Michael could make out 3 of the 5 enemy now, lying in peculiar positions near the blast site. "Good hits, 5 by EKIA," Michael heard the controller say. The original enemy position went quiet immediately after the strike. The SEALs, Marines, and scouts maneuvered to assess and secure the building. The scouts entered and cleared it only to find that the enemy had left the area. "All right, guys, there's nothing left here. Let's Charlie Mike," said Chief Fortin, and the SEALs and scouts moved to reestablish their security position for the main element. So that's what they were doing.
Yeah, I would get phone messages where Michael would call, would miss, would leave a message. "Just kicking back with my bros, send cigars."
Critical information, send cigars.
Exactly.
There's really good examples of this throughout the book. Another one. Immediately, enemy fire began to hit the wall around the rooftop. Michael repositioned toward the contact and fired. The enemy were using the cover of surrounding houses effectively and continued to harass the security position. It was clear this was not like other attacks. It was well coordinated. The enemy was careful not to engage from the same spot for too long and continued to maneuver and flank. The rounds from Mike's 48 began to eat chunks out of the corners and ledges that the enemy were using as cover. The short rooftop wall was beginning to degrade as well, however, and bullets were penetrating the plaster in some areas. The men stayed low and continued to engage. Michael was glad he had prepped his extra ammo ahead of time. It looked as though he would be needing it soon. Michael and the other SEALs on the rooftop were not the only ones taking fire. The Iraqi Army scouts were trying to exit the house to maneuver on the insurgents, but were pinned inside. Every time one of the scouts tried to exit the house, a hail of bullets hit the area around the exit. On the rooftop, the situation was not improving, and it looked like ammunition might soon become a problem. Not for Michael. He continued to engage multiple enemy positions, stopping only to reload and reposition. "Mikey, how's your ammo?" yelled JP. "I'm good to go." "Damn, bro, carrying all that extra weight might save all our lives." JP smiled, but he was really dead serious. Michael's 48 continued to eat away at enemy positions. An indistinct yell came from the right. Michael turned to see one of the enemy insurgents trying to cross the street towards the SEALs' positions. He sent a burst, and the enemy fighter fell against the hot pavement, motionless. With this, the momentum changed, and Michael moved from position to position, engaging the enemy on 3 sides. He was the only AW gunner on the roof, and although the other SEALs were holding their own as well, the 5.56 millimeter M4 doesn't have quite the same effect as a 7.62 millimeter belt-fed machine gun. The enemy was losing, and it began to show. The volume of fire had drastically decreased and was much more sporadic until only one enemy position was still active. The SEALs and scouts concentrated fire on the spot. The area went quiet, and the men waited for another attack, but it never came. In all, Michael had fired more than 600 rounds of ammunition and was likely the reason that the security position was not overrun. 7 enemy lay dead, without one SEAL or scout injured.
A lot of rounds.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I've told you this story before, but I went over to Corregidor to check in on everybody, and as soon as I get there, everyone's like, "Hey, go watch Mikey's video." So I'm like, cool. So I go over. I'm like, go to Mikey's palace, which is his little room. He's got, I remember he had some kind of like red curtains.
Bright
in there.
orange stuff.
Yeah, well, those are orange. I don't know where he probably took them from a house out in town.
His brother sent him to him.
Oh, there you go.
He goes, we're saying so. I think this will fit.
Yeah, so I go in there and I'm like, "Mikey, let me see your video." And he gets out and he's just showing it to me on his. He had a video camera. But this is when the video cameras had just started to have their own little screens and their own little speakers, so I'm watching it. And this is the famous video, at least it's famous in our task unit, where Mikey's like filming, there's freaking everyone shooting, there's bullets flying everywhere, and then Mikey turns the video camera back at himself and he says, "It's the Mulab," which was...
I've never seen that.
Oh, you haven't seen that?
No.
Oh, man, we got to get that to you. Yeah, so Mikey's filming this firefight, and as he's filming, it's a pretty good firefight, and then he turns the camera back at himself, and he's got a big smile on his face, and he goes, "It's the Mulab," or "Welcome to the Mulab," or something like that, which the district was called the Malab district, but he says it's the Mulab. And so I'm watching it, I'm like Mr. Serious, and so I'm trying to hold back, but I'm smiling, and then he gets done, and he's looking at me, and I look at him, I go, "Bro, what are you doing filming when there's a freaking gunfight going on?" And he looks at me and he goes, "I was Winchester, sir," which means he was out of ammo. So he had already dumped 1,000 rounds, or probably 800 to 1,000 rounds of ammunition. Didn't have any ammo left, and so he's like, "Well, I might as well make some videos." But yeah, I mean, it's when I got home, I remember I was talking to some of the Vietnam SEALs, and I went and talked to this one Vietnam SEAL that was a machine gunner in Vietnam, and I said. How many engagements did you get in? And he said, "Oh, we did whatever it was." He said, "We did 82 operations and we got in 7 gunfights." I said, "How many times did you use all your ammunition?" He's never. And here it was. I mean, there was machine gunners would run out of ammo on not a fairly regular, but definitely ran out of ammo, because that was the scenario. That was the situation on the ground.
And that's why he would take less water. Mm-hmm. He always took just what he hoped he could, need, and he would substitute the water for ammo.
Yeah, and he'd be carrying radio sometimes too.
Yeah,
which
so
is
he's
crazy.
Carrying a load. And he has a sense of humor.
Oh, yeah, it's the Mulab. I can't believe you haven't seen that video. Oh, it's freaking classic. Meanwhile, Well, while that's going on, back to the book. Hey, Dad, it's Mike. Michael spoke happily into a satellite phone. He'd just returned from an op, but after showering and changing in his gear, he dialed home to check in. Mikey, how you doing? I'm doing good, Dad. We're still training Iraqi forces. I'm pretty bored here.
Yeah.
What's new at home? Michael was careful not to detail the true nature of the work they conducted on a daily basis. He didn't want his parents to worry. He preferred to keep the amount of danger they faced to himself. As George and Michael discussed his gear and weapons, Sally walked over to George. She was eager to hear Michael's voice. She had barely spoken to him since he left because every time he called, she made sure her children and husband had ample time with Michael on the phone first. She was also busy finishing up a master's degree in counseling, marriage, and family therapy, so any amount of time she had to speak with Michael, she treasured. Michael never discussed any of his combat operations with her. She knew he wanted to protect her from worrying. But she also knew better. She had walked past the hallway when her sons were on their computer looking at photos of Michael patrolling through the streets, and she instantly knew he was facing grave enemy day in and day out. She couldn't be there, but she could pray, and that's what she did. She prayed the rosary, a collection of prayers based on the life of Christ and honoring his blessed mother, whom warfighters have credited assisting them in epic battles throughout history. Sally wasn't seeking anything grand with her prayers. She simply requested protection for her son as she prayed it every single day. It was now Sally's turn to speak to Michael, and she held the phone tightly to her ear so she could hear her son clearly. How are you, Mike? I miss you. Did you receive the care packages we sent to you? We really enjoyed making them for you and your teammates. They were great, Mom. Thank you. Even the package full of female toiletries you and your friends threw in there.
Yeah, she had these women volunteers, and they did other charity work, and they sent stuff. And so nobody knows how that got in there, but Mike says, you guys had kind of a crazy look when they opened that one up, like, are women coming?
Yeah, so my wife is at home. Yeah. She got 3 kids. They're like, how old were they? They were like maybe 7, 5, and 3 or something like this. They're maybe even 6, 4, and 2 or something like this. So she doesn't have time to do all this stuff. So finally I get, everyone's getting care packages and all this nice stuff. I'm not getting anything. Finally, like 2 months in deployment, I get a package. And I still harass my wife about this. I like honey roasted peanuts, right? And so she sent me a Planters thing of honey roasted peanuts, but it was open and it had been taped shut. It was open, it was half eaten. My freaking kids got into it. It was taped shut. That's what I got. I'm like, thanks, darling. But I didn't ever get women's toiletries.
Yeah, no one figured out where those came from, but they got a lot of women's magazines too from people. Because Sal would contact anybody that would send things. Yeah. We sent stuff, and people with volunteers send stuff, and it was just crazy. Guys would risk their life to go out and get those packages. Hey, women toiletries, just what we need.
He says, I'm going to go head to bed now. I want to say hello to you guys. Mike's voice began to drift off. The day's operation had begun to hit him like a wall. His body was now just registering the need for sleep. Of course, take care of yourself. We're all okay here, Michael. Stay focused so you can come home safe, Sally said. Those words became her parting words every time she spoke to him. Stay focused so you can come home safe.
We would lie in bed just kind of looking at the ceiling, and Sal would say, we all know that he's just not kicking back. It's kind of a charade here, but we were pretty aware of how bad Ramadi was, but we knew he didn't really want to get into it, so we kept the conversations pretty light.
Now, when Mark got killed, did you guys become aware when Mark got killed?
Yeah, went to the funeral, and that's where Sally met
Debbie.
But also I keep thinking Kay.
From the book.
Yeah,
met Cowie.
Got it. Cowie comes up to her in his crutches and says, "Michael saved my life. Michael saved my life." And that's when Sal was thinking, well, how could he save your life if he's just marching people around? And then he told her the story, and that's why it was like, yeah, we know a little bit better than that. But And of course, we had a conversation. I remind him, we don't really need heroes. Just do a good job. And he says, "Don't worry. If I remember him saying, we talked about his death, about Lee's death and everything, and those guys took it pretty hard. And I said, we've really got to be careful. And he goes, don't worry. He says, if I go here, I will be the one that decides. I still remember that. Especially when he didn't have to. He could have gotten out of that. He decided. And it just always sticks in my head, that conversation.
Yeah, I know that, I mean, my wife had no idea of what was going on at all. But then...
Well, no, because she didn't even give you a full can.
That's true.
I'd say she has no clue.
But, you know, even Cowie got wounded, but, you know, I think she just thought it was an anomaly. And like I said, I mean, she had... She had 3 kids going on, freaking young kids and everything. But I think everybody, when Mark got killed, it was like, oh,
wake up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was looking through my emails a while ago, which is crazy to look through emails, and I have like all the emails. I was reading emails that I sent my wife, and you know, it's like, oh, what is it? July 29th, you know, then July 1st or so, July 31st, and then August 2nd. That's the day Mark died. And there's, I sent an email August 3rd, like, hey, hope everything's okay, something like this, but still nothing. And I think that was everybody, kind of like what Mikey was doing. So you just don't want people to worry, but then that was just no way to hide that.
Yeah. Well, we saw Cowie again. We invited some of the SEALs for Thanksgiving, and we still didn't know the whole story. And then on Thanksgiving, he says, Sal, can I talk to you? And they went into another room, and he says, let me tell you what I saw. And then he pulls up his shirt, and he has that huge tattoo. He goes, Monsoor, I swear this is what I saw. So it was like,
Yeah. Yeah. So Cowie, who was in Tasking a Bruiser and was just a freaking awesome guy. That's the opening story, is Mikey dragging him out of the street, and he ended up getting a tattoo of Mikey with these angels' wings. Cowie was telling the story the other day, and one thing he was saying, it was like he was about to say something, like maybe he was like, hey, I need, and as soon as he was saying I need help, like he felt Mikey's hand like grab his gear and start pulling him. He was like, that's Johnny on the spot right there.
I'm not real religious, but things like this just hit me sometimes. Like, I don't know, I don't have explanations for some of these things. I think the older you get, you start to see more things that are just can't really explain. But
it was the 15th of August. The Iraqi Army, along with the U.S. Army, would be conducting clearance of another portion of the Malab district. The houses were tightly packed, and clearance would likely be slow. The SEALs came prepared and were all set with cardboard shade, water, and a ton of extra ammunition. The men didn't know it, but they would soon have no need for the shade. As the call to prayer ended, Michael scanned the surrounding area with his periscope. He glanced over to see his teammates to the right, each with their own as well. He smiled and continued to scan. It had worked out so well for Michael that a bunch of guys had them sent out. Michael ended up getting his like combat periscopes, which ended up being awesome.
Yeah, I remember Sarah was sending that out, and she's looking at me like, were they playing games over there?
Yeah. Imagine how nice it is when you don't have to poke your head up over a wall. Yeah. Nothing to see here, guys. Just the Iraqi Army and dudes getting unloaded, Michael called. Then the loudspeakers crackled on. That's weird, thought Michael. It seemed as though the prayers were going to start again. A voice came over the loudspeakers, but it sounded different this time. It was not the usual singing. It was speaking, and the words were different. What is that? Are they praying again? That doesn't sound like prayer, Chief Fortin said. I know, it's not the same, Michael responded. The interpreter burst through the cupola door and onto the roof. It's directions. They're being directed, he blurted. What? Who? Asked Chief Fortin. The speakers. The enemy fighters are being directed on where to go, the interpreter replied. Oh, well, shit. Oh, well, shit. JP, Doug, Mike, do you have a shot to take out those speakers? Called Chief Fortin. But the snipers had already been trying to work a solution. No joy, Chief, was the response. Mikey, I hope you brought a lot of ammo. Shit's probably going to get real stupid real quick, Chief Fortin said. Always, Mikey replied.
Was that the 12-hour?
Yeah. That one, what ends up happening, comms chatter, but most of it was not pertinent to Michael. Most of it was information flow from different units leaders back to the Joint Operations Center where the operation is being monitored. Michael's concern was keeping the enemy pinned, and if one of them was brave enough to try and move out in the open, dropping in him his tracks. The clearance was ongoing, but the insurgents currently attacking the SEAL position were relentless. And I fast-forwarded to this. They just basically got like an all-out assault. Right. This was not ideal, but it also meant that they were not trying to advance towards the Overwatch position. It had been hours, and neither side could get the upper hand. Michael moved from position to position, firing at multiple enemy locations. It looked as though this fight was not going to be over anytime soon, and he wasn't wrong. The entire engagement lasted 12 hours.
I mean, imagine people have never served 12 hours. I mean, it's the way these guys stay together, and then the next day they go up and do it again. It's people. I just don't. It's just remarkable what these guys do.
Yeah, you know, a lot of times, you know, people talk about basic SEAL training, and they talk about BUDS. Oh, BUDS was hard, and look, it is hard. It's hard as hell. And it's a nightmare for guys to try and get through. But what you just talked about and what I usually try and explain to people is, oh, you saw an Army guy get killed. You were in a firefight yesterday. You had rounds snap by your head. You had like all these things happen. I mean, on some of these engagements, JP dragged a Marine out of the street. I forget the number, but the Marine got shot, another Marine got shot, an Iraqi got shot, a SEAL got shot through his backpack, through his water bladder, his camelback on his. So it was like in one little engagement, 5 people got shot. And what do? The next day, you go out again. Yeah. And then the next day, you go out again. So, yeah, look, BUDS is hard. I get it. But this stuff right here, and look, it's not just SEALs. The Marines are going out every day. The Army's going out every day. And everyone's taking those risks. And that's why the bond was so tight with the Army and the Marine Corps in Ramadi, because everyone was doing everything we could to protect each other. And that's why that bond was and is so strong.
Yeah. Yeah, I read some of Michael's emails. And his friends in the States crying that their girlfriend doesn't love him anymore, or her boyfriend left, and they're having a tough time in college. And Mike writes back, encourage them and the whole deal. And I'm thinking, really? They're having a tough time?
Yeah. It's it definitely is, and that's what I love about this book, is you start to realize this is what the daily life is like. Captured it really, really well.
And I think that's important for people to read these type of books and get a taste. And these stories, as you said, they're from the guys that were there. These stories are real. And I think it would give the rest of the country just kind of a fingernail sketch of what these guys go through. And also, if you have, teenage children, they can see that guys like Michael, they're just like them. They have problems when they're kids, and they deal with bullies. And it's that determination and that strength that you build up in your life that prepares you for the world.
Yeah, and you know, the fact that the first time Mikey went to Bud's, he quit.
Yeah.
And you know who else did? Mark Lee. Mark Lee, the first time he went to Bud's, he quit.
I didn't know that. No.
And I always, you know, occasionally I'll talk to someone that had been to Bud's and quit. And I usually tell them, if they seem like they're a good person, I'll say, if they say they want to go back, and I'll say, hey, you heard of Mikey Monsoor? And they say, yeah. And I go, Mikey Monsoor quit the first time he went. And now I'm going to be able to tell them, but when you get defeated, it's what you do. What's the quote I got to learn? It's how you come back from defeat.
How you come back from defeat.
So that's what I'm talking about.
That's
so
the man.
We're going to add that in there.
Whatever it is, it's the way you come back. It's always the way you go. Because we've all had losses. And for me, when I have a bad loss, it just burns. It's there forever. Sometimes you forget about those easy wins, but you remember those losses.
Oh, yeah.
And usually, hopefully, you'll walk away with a lesson. And Michael just, when that happened, it didn't surprise me at all. He was coming back. He will win. Yeah.
So pushing a little bit further into deployment, we're getting towards the end of deployment. Michael gripped the phone close to his mouth. Hey, Dad, we're just about done here. I volunteered to stay for a few more operations so one of the guys could leave early. His wife is having a baby soon. It won't be long. I expect to be finished up in about a week. I'll also be helping to do turnover with the incoming team. Then I'm heading out. My stuff is packed and ready to go. That's great news, Mikey. Your mom and I can't wait to see you. We're going to celebrate and have a big party when you get back stateside. George felt a great relief to learn that Mikey was so close to coming home, and almost silly for having thought that he may not see his son again. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you soon. And that's something you told me a little while ago, was that Mikey was always telling you about who's married and checking in on who has kids, and that was a big concern of his.
It was. He knew who had kids, who was married, and he would tell me, I worry about these guys. He goes, I don't want to be the guy that lost one of these guys who has children, because he believed fathers, mothers is a two-person deal, and he's always loved kids, and he just would be so bothered knowing that on his watch somebody lost a father. And he would talk about, I mean, how many people really want to find out who's got kids and married? But he would want to know, and he would keep it in the back of his mind. Mm-hmm. So I know it always concerned him, because he just didn't want to lose a father.
It was the 28th of September, and the 1st of the 506 had one last request, Operation Kentucky Jumper. The SEALs would be providing overwatch for Combat Outpost Eagle's Nest while the external wall of the combat outpost was being reinforced. In addition, the 1st of the 506 would be conducting a clearance in the same area, which the SEALs would cover as well. The insert would take place at night. The two elements would leave COP Eagle's Nest and set up mutually supporting rooftop overwatch positions in two prominent houses, much like they had been doing for the entire deployment. The men had conducted this type of operation many times, and at this point it seemed like this one would be much the same. So they push in, they do this overwatch. Around 11 a.m., the Army moved out of the area, having finished operations for the day. The SEAL overwatch positions remained in place and would extract under the cover of darkness later that night. Other than the 1st of the 506 doing clearance ops and us being in the area providing overwatch, it was kind of a somber day, Doug said, referring to how the day was going in comparison to other similar operations they had completed. Based on most of the previous operations, the likelihood of another firefight was low. The temperature was reaching 115 degrees, and they would stay there until late into the afternoon and only begin to cool when the sun dipped below the horizon. As the morning turned into day and then early afternoon, Michael, Doug, and Mike S. talked of heading home and what was next for each of them. There was a sense of excitement. We were proud of what we did. We were proud of our relationships we had built with the Army and the Marine Corps, recalls Mike Sorelli. The men talked of their families. Doug would be headed back to Georgia to see his 3 sons. Mike S. was ready to get back to his 2-year-old little girl. Michael listened as the guys spoke of heading home. He was ready as well. Sniper school, heading into his next platoon, snowboarding trips, and driving up the coast to see his family in Garden Grove. Doug recalls how cool and relaxed Michael was. He just had a real calming sense to him. You could tell instantly what a great person and warrior he was. To this point, it was the most one-on-one time Doug had spent with Michael. As the day continued on, the intense heat had begun to wear on the men. The shade material helped, but the heat radiated from surfaces all around them. Not even the light breeze brought reprieve. The air was stifling, dry, and filled with dust. The lack of activity and the heat induced lethargy, degrading the men's awareness. Boom! An explosion rocked the rooftop. Michael ran back over to the position between Mike S. and Doug. "What was that? RPG?" asked Doug. "Sure seemed like it," Mike S. replied. The anger on Michael's face was apparent as he searched for the insurgent responsible for the attack. Mike S. moved out of his loophole and called the other element. "We just took an RPG. Searching for the shooter now. What have you guys got?" Doug rolled into the open spot as it had a better field of view than his loophole. Michael sat on the chair between the two with his Mark 48 resting on the wall of the rooftop. Mike S. continued updating the other element while Michael, Doug, and Benny scanned the area. They saw nothing. No enemy movement. Suddenly, an object just barely cleared the lip of the wall and hit Michael in the chest. It bounced off and rolled to the ground directly in front of him. Mike S. looked over at what had just landed next to the group, then up at Michael. Michael stood so quickly and with such force that the chair he was sitting on sailed across the rooftop and impacted the opposite wall. Michael looked at Mike S. and yelled, "Grenade." Mike S. watched in disbelief as Michael, the only one of them who had an out to escape the blast, instead lunged forward, dropping directly onto the grenade. Seth's element had heard and seen the two blasts from their overwatch position and were already moving when the call for help came in. The men urgently picked up the pace when they heard the amount of enemy automatic weapons fire that their friends were receiving. They broke out from the main entrance, and headed west. Initially, it was all quiet at their position, but within 15 seconds of hitting the street, all hell broke loose. Enemy rounds snapped and skipped around them. They moved from cover to cover, returning fire as they closed the distance to the other overwatch position. They were only 2 blocks away, but to the wounded SEALs, it seemed like it took forever for the other element to arrive. "Hold on, Mikey, hold on," Mike S. said as he and Doug continued to assess and aid Michael. Suddenly, a SEAL from the other element burst onto the roof and headed over to Doug, Mike S., and Michael. He was followed by Seth and the other SEALs. One of the strongest SEALs grabbed Michael and hoisted him onto his back. Seth grabbed Doug, and the others took Mike S. They could hear the 25mm autocannons of the Bradley fighting vehicles begin to fire, effectively suppressing the enemy and providing cover for the SEALs to load their wounded. Mike S. directed the group as they moved down the stairs and into the alley to the waiting Bradleys. Doug, Mike S., and Michael were loaded into the back along with one of the SEALs from the other element. He stayed to continue to aid Michael while the Bradleys extracted them and headed back to Camp Corregidor. When the wounded SEALs arrived, they saw the men from the 1st to the 506 lined up waiting to support whatever they could, another testament to the bond that the two units shared. Doug, Mike S., and Michael were loaded onto stretchers and brought into the aid station on the camp. Doug and Mike S. were given shots of morphine for the first time since the grenade explosion. They finally had reprieve from the physical, piercing pain. The reprieve, however, was short-lived. The atmosphere in the room shifted, the mood had darkened, and the two men could feel it. Then they overheard the nurse say it. Michael was gone. In that sobering moment, they became aware of what Michael had given them. He had freely exchanged his life for theirs. It was September 29th, the feast day of St. Michael, the Archangel. the protector and guide of warfighters since time immemorial, and whom Michael had been named 25 years earlier.
It was a bad day for the family. Remember, Jim called me. Could hear him crying. Dad, it's bad. It's bad. I said, what's bad? He says, Michael died. Ramadi. Please get a hold of Joe. I tried to call Joe, and I finally got a hold of him. He was playing football in North Dakota, and I couldn't even tell him. Finally got a hold of him. I couldn't even tell him. I couldn't even talk. I said, call your brother. And I guess when Sal saw him at the door, the Navy, she just knew. It was a bad day. I just, because you had that call that says, I'm coming home. So now it's like, all you're planning is what we're going to do when we get together. It didn't happen.
Well, so I'd been tracking the operation. I was in the Tactical Operations Center, and it was troops in contact, which was like I said, this was like a almost daily occurrence that guys would be in there. And then, you hear wounded, and now all of a sudden that's not common. And the Casevacs get called, and I can hear some of the radio calls, and I end up redirecting the Casevac to their location. And finally it was actually Colonel Clark, God bless him. He called me. And yeah, he told me Sorelli and Doug, he said they were wounded, but they're going to be all right. He said Benny was going to be okay. He said that Sorelli and Doug were getting flown out. And he said Mikey wasn't going to make it. And we sent guys to escort Mikey home, and we still had to finish deployment. We still had to turn over with the next guys. And thankfully, Andrew Paul, he's the guy that had come home early.
Yeah, Mike relieved him so he could have his wife could have the baby.
And so he knew. Obviously he was Mikey's, assistant platoon commander with Seth, and thankfully he was home so that he could be there. But as soon I talked to Seth had to go back out into town. By the way, they got back, and Seth had to go back into the city because they had left their Iraqis there. They left a bunch of gear there, and so Seth had to go back out, gather up their Iraqis, gather up all their gear, come back, and then he called me, and he immediately he knew. He said, "Hey, Mikey jumped on a grenade." And a few hours later, I talked to Mike and Doug, and they're in Germany, and they're like, "Hey, he saved us. That's the only reason we're here." And I talked to Seth, and Seth was like drafting up the Medal of Honor, and I was like, "Do it."
I remember I did. When Seth came to visit the house, I didn't want to see him. It was like, I've had it with you guys. I don't even want to see you. Seth is hard to say no to because you can see the sincerity on his face. And, the family we just worked it out. But we can cry at any moment when we think of Mike.
That's it's the way it is. I know, and man, Sarah, your daughter, what a just awesome woman.
Yeah. Very strong.
Very strong. And I remember her, and I don't. She said it to me, but I think I remember her seeing it later. People were, you guys were getting interviewed. She was getting interviewed, and she was basically, someone said, were you surprised that this happened? And she said, no. Anybody that knew Mikey's not surprised by this. Yeah. At what point did you hear about the Medal of Honor?
What happened was some guy from the newspapers called us about it, and I didn't know what he was talking about. And we had gotten so many calls, all kinds of things. We had hate calls. We had newspapers, interviews. Most of the stuff we said no. And we just want to be left alone. In fact, we were so used to getting bad calls. I remember the president was trying to call us because this is when they decided to award him the medal. And Sarah kept trying to tell me, would you pick up the phone?
The president.
And I was thinking, I go, this guy keeps bothering me. It's just the same number. I don't know what this asshole wants. And then she goes, Dad, would you just pick up the phone? So that's when we knew it was real, because you hear people, everyone is talking, well, you could do this and that. But I mean, it's nice, but it's not your son.
Yeah.
And our family appreciated it, but that hole is still there. I think anyone who's lost a child, I don't care if it's in the hospital, an accident, there's a hole, and we're in a real sad family. And me and Debbie Lee were talking about it. It's just there, and it just hits you every once in a while. Hearing kids playing in the playground or something like that, it just hits you. You just don't get over it. But we were treated very, very nicely. Surprising, because I was in the Marines, and the SEAL family is totally different. And I was kind of shocked. I was like almost too shocked. Okay, well, leave us alone, But I was really taken back by these guys coming over and checking on the family, and it was a good thing.
At what point did you hear about the ship?
I was about, I remember Dr. Winter talked about a ship, and see, we don't know anything about the Navy. We're not into the ceremony stuff, and it was like, yeah, okay, whatever. Didn't really think about it. Mm-hmm. It was just in passing, we thought. And then a while later, maybe 6 months later, we get this thing where they're going to name a ship after Michael. We had no idea it was going to be like 10 years. I mean, it was just incredible. And it was like fly here, fly there. And that's why my kids, after a while, we're not going any place. We didn't realize it was going to turn into a job. And everything was nice, and but it's not something we really wanted. We were real happy to just go back to simple. Nobody knows us, and so it was busy for the first couple of years, and finally it disappeared, and it was okay. But inside I would think, leave it to Mikey. He's still got something going on. And even this book, people would talk to me. We'd have writers sitting on our porch wanting to write a book, and must have had a dozen of them, and we passed on all of them. And then just when one of the sailors did a book on Michael and gave it to us, he met us up at the cemetery. And that's when I started thinking my grandchildren should have a book, because they should see what it's like. You know, they got to understand that Uncle Michael, went through some of the same things they went through. You know, it just doesn't happen. You've got to have, you know, you've got to be able to figure things out. You have to be strong enough, because when you're a kid, you're bullied, or you're not sure of yourself. The world is really scary for them. And I thought it would be good that they could see their uncle had the same kind of problems, and he got through it, and they can get through it too. So, and I would hope anybody who would read this, the same thing, you know, a young man or reading this, realizes he's got a long ways to go in his life, and he can pull himself together. Some guys, I hired a lot of young people in my time, and some of them, they just never got that message. Now they're in their 30s and 40s, and they're still children.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's weird too. I got to admit, from my perspective, when you talk about Mikey, like as a boy, by the time he was in the teams, which is when I met him, he was no boy. No. And then I was telling you this before we started recording, like, he was getting big, right?
Yeah.
So he cut the sleeves off all of his shirts. Everyone started calling him sleeves because he was just like getting jacked. But I mean, he was, you know, even when we say Kevin Lace is a really big guy, but Mikey was also big. So it's interesting when you put it all together, and like you say, the arc of the book, the Mikey I knew was just a badass, right? Yeah. And he might have been a new guy, and he might have been, you know, like young for the SEAL teams. Yeah. But he was a badass. Yeah. So to connect that to this guy who, you know, had asthma and got bullied, and like while I knew Mike was not getting bullied by anybody. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So he had overcome all that, and like you said, risen up, and at the same time that he had that quality, like there's literally no one else that you would rather have to watch your back.
Yeah. No, he was, if he said I've got it, he meant it. You know, if he says you're my friend, you could take it to the bank. He will do everything that he can if you have a problem. And I remember Gabe talking about how close they were. Gabe was Greek, and Michael being Lebanese, he would call him his Lebanese brother. No, he called him his Mediterranean brother. We'll go out and choke on some olives or something. I don't know.
You know, the stuff with the ship. I mean, I got to look at it from afar. Right, I wasn't all mixed up in it like you guys were.
Fly in all the time.
Yeah, you guys. The keel. This is from the book. The keel laying is the first of 3 ceremonies in the life of a ship, symbolizing the ship's transition from a mere concept to a product that will one day become a U.S. warship. Navy tradition has celebrated a special keel laying ceremony for hundreds of years. Yeah. And so it talks about the fact that you guys went to Bath Iron Works up in Maine, and welded your initials onto this like piece that goes in there. That's sort of the initial.
There's just so much tradition that the Navy has, and it was we would do those things, and then Sal welded something in on the bridge someplace, you know, and it's like
and they somehow got wood. This guy, Captain Smith, who's a great guy, Captain Scott Smith, who like took this with the utmost seriousness, of course, because he's the first commanding officer of this ship. And they got wood from the USS Constitution.
It was like crazy.
How do you do that? You have this here. Each naval warship has its own crest and motto. And Captain Smith, who's the first commanding officer, took meticulous efforts to honor the ship's namesake with each one. For the crest, he was given parameters of simply using a shield. Yeah. The rest was up to him. He knew exactly what to do in order to make sure the ship honored the ship and namesake perfectly. There were a handful of people, family, teammates, and friends he would need to talk to. He was introduced to Steve Gilmore, retired naval surface warfare captain.
A great guy.
He's the best. Yeah. He is.
He's just on your side.
Oh, he's 100%. Yeah. He helped me I'm very good friends with him, and he helped me with everything I ever needed help with. And look, I caused all kinds of trouble for that poor guy. I was constantly causing. He would bail me out of all kinds of things. So thank you, Mr. Steve Gilmore. But he was able to connect Captain Smith with a bunch of different people. Captain Smith sat down for hours with each group, learned as much as he could in order to create something remarkable that would inspire his future crew members. They would collectively come up with the connected with something that connected the family with the Navy as well as the ship's unique components. And so this is for the motto of the ship became "I will defend," which carries a threefold meaning. Every military member takes an oath to support and defend the Constitution. Another prominent military ethos says, "I will defend the defenseless." And the St. Michael prayer calls upon the mighty angelic soldier to defend us in battle.
Have you been in the ship?
I have.
When I talked to Scott, I was like, we wanted something for the SEALs, not to be forgotten. And that's why if you walk in, you'll see the pictures of those other SEALs. Yep. And it was important to us that those SEALs aren't forgotten, because sometimes Congressional Medal of Honor, people forget about these people. Well, pain is the same. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to remember them on that ship. So he did a good job for us.
No, they did a beautiful job. The ship was awesome, and they ended up with there's a flintlock pistol which came from the Trident on the thing, which is awesome. There's a Roman numeral 3, which is like legit for Team 3.
Scott did his homework.
Yeah, no, he definitely did an awesome job with all that. And eventually the ship gets christened, and that was just awesome. Christening took place. That was up in Bath as well, up in Maine. That was when Sally broke the
That was fun for her. She was so afraid. I just want to make sure I hit it hard enough. I go, well, put my face right there. I'm sure you'll be able to muster hitting that thing.
And then finally you get the actual ship's commissioning.
Yeah.
And this is when the ship becomes a U.S. Navy ship. But it says here, Major Halliday was announced and approached the podium to give the invocation. He had flown in all the way from Korea for the special event. Upon finishing his opening prayer, the other speakers approached the podium. One after the other, they rendered their special remarks and honored the family of the ship's namesake as well as the impressive ship itself. Then Major General Ron Clark, who was formerly a lieutenant colonel, who's now a major general. This is how long it's been. He's now a major general. Who led the 1st of the 506 Red Currahee Battalion during the Battle of Ramadi, walked commandingly over to the podium. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. The bravery and sacrifice of these warriors is the highest form of service to our nation. At a time when less than 1% of American citizens will ever don the cloth of our nation in her defense, these men and women endured hardship, danger, and personal sacrifice every day to protect our country and our way of life. Let me be very clear. Our band of brothers was brought together through our fight against a tough and violent enemy. In fact, we refer to SEAL Team 3 as Army SEALs. It was the fight that brought us together, but really what defined our task force was one word: love. A brotherly love that warriors in arms share in battle, defined by selfless commitment to a mission and selfless commitment unfailing to one another. There is no greater human emotion than the feeling to belong to a team, to a unit, to a brotherhood, to a family. My association with these warriors has been the most meaningful professional relationships of my life.
And anybody who served understands that. I mean, there are guys that I met in the service that I loved them as much as my own brothers. And the kind of situation in Ramadi, that's even deeper.
Yeah, Debbie Lee will explain that you know, Mark would tell her, these guys are my brothers. And she'd say, well, what do you mean? Like, you have a brother, you know?
It's not the same.
And then when Mark died and she met all of us, she realized, oh, you are brothers.
Yeah. And put the seal squeeze on her, too.
Finally, the ship's sponsor and sole woman on stage walked to the podium. She smiled, her humble demeanor evident to all in attendance. She began by sharing her heartfelt gratitude to all who were with them to honor her son. She continued thanking the men and women of the military, whom she regarded as the best in the world. Finally, without further ado, she gave an order that the crew had been eagerly awaiting to hear. Officers and crew of the USS Michael Monsoor man our ship and bring her to life.
That was a good day.
That was awesome. And we weren't the ship's crew, but they had Task Unit Bruiser was the guys that ran up and manned the ship.
Yeah.
Luckily, we didn't have to drive anywhere with it or anything. So none of us know how to do any of that. But man, it was just awesome to see that. Yeah. And
yeah, you hustled pretty good. I saw you guys out there. They're going, when was the last time those guys ran?
Well, so, you know, the guys before, they're like, hey, Jocko, like, don't run too fast because, like, some guys ain't been doing too much, right? So, of course, I'm all fired up with adrenaline and all hyped. And I guess I went a little quicker than I should have, but, you know, wore some of the guys out. And just to close this out, Father Halliday stepped up to the podium. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, bless and approve this newly commissioned vessel, the USS Michael Monsoor, and its crew. Send your holy angels as custodians and guides. May Michael and the Archangel ever defend it in battle. Be its protector against all enemies and ravages of foul weather. May this vessel and crew always know the friendship of the creatures of the deep, the camaraderie of the winds, and the enmity of the tides. And may the USS Michael Monsoor ever know the unified patronage of the citizens of heaven, the creatures of earth, and every mission it undertakes to restore peace, ensure freedom, and enact justice for all.
I've met so many really wonderful people over this, and Father Halliday was one. He also did a mass and baptized Joseph's son on that ship.
Nice.
Yeah. So there was just a lot of really great people, and as far as that, Sal and I were just, it was some good times.
Well, now is that Joseph's son Mikey?
Yeah. Old Mikey's, yeah.
It is the weirdest thing, right? So, as you know, I wrote this book, Mikey and the Dragons, right? And it's the Mikey's named after Mikey. And my friend John Bozak's the artist. And I'm like, hey, you know, here's the story. And so he sends me the first pictures. And they're black and white, so I don't really think much of it. And then first color one comes. And in the book, he's got Mikey with blonde hair. And I'm like, hey, man, you know, like, Mikey's freaking Lebanese, bro. He's black hair. But then when you look at the book, and he's like talking me through it, you look at the book, like even the cover, like it's all black, and it got this blonde-headed kid. It makes the kid stand out. And I'm like, all right, well, hey, we're going to bleach out Mikey a little bit for this one. But then I meet little Mikey, and sure enough, he's a towhead.
Yeah. I think I told you I was complaining to Joe. I says, Joe, you got 3 little girls and you got Mikey, and they're all towheads. I says, you couldn't have given me one brown kid with a big nose? Seriously?
Oh, man. But I mean, it is awesome seeing that ship, and with this book that you just wrote with Rose, and Rose did a fantastic job. You know, she's married to a SEAL, so she captured a lot of stuff.
She put up with a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure it was a
pretty tough
challenge.
lady. Yeah,
just trying to get stories out of guys. Everyone's on all different schedules. No, she did a great job, and because she's married to a SEAL, I think she captured it in a way that a normal author wouldn't have been able to.
Yeah, when we talked, she pestered me for 2 years. And Steve would go, I don't know, I think she's pretty good. Anyway, we talked. It was like I said, we want like real stories, because she sent in samples of authors, and they wrote about the glory of war and all that. And I said, I want to vomit. I said, that is not what we're looking for. We want real stuff. And so what was good about the SEALs is she couldn't call them. They wouldn't give her the time of day. I would call them and tell them what I'd like to do. And we had a lot of stories, but a lot of the guys, they didn't want to share those stories. It was personal, and so I respect that. But some of the guys, after a couple of calls, they would open up to Rose. And I felt like as they opened up, they actually felt good about it. And it kind of like let out a little bit of some of that pressure, what happened over there. And I was surprised how many said it was okay if they used, their name. Mm-hmm. So that's when I started thinking, well, then they probably feel pretty good about it. And these are all true stories. So I think it's a book that is worth reading.
No, it's 100% worth reading, and it's a way for Mikey's legacy to carry on. You carry on in the ship, and it's great when you meet the ship and the ship's crew. They all know the story. They're all fired up. I mean, they do an awesome thing, and it's written about in the book as well. As when you pull into San Diego Harbor, off to your left-hand side is Rosecrans, where Mikey's buried, and actually Mark's buried there, and Seth Stone's buried there. But when you pull in, they man the rails and they give the ship salute, to Mikey, which is just awesome. So you got the legacy carrying on with the crew, with the ship in this book, and the young, the young SEALs today. This is what they're raised on. They're raised on this is the ideal SEAL. This is a guy that works hard, that's never going to give up, and that's going to take care of his brothers, and that's Mikey.
Well, you have those. I think you have Mark's in there, and Mikey's is when the SEALs come in, they see those displays. Yeah, and I actually think it's important so people don't forget, no matter who it is. There are guys that really they believed in what they did, and these young SEALs should know that it's passed on to them.
Well, thank you so much for writing this book. Thanks to Rose as well. Thanks for coming down here. Hey, Echo, you got any questions?
No, sir.
No, sir.
You just woke him up.
Anybody that's listening, the book's available. We'll have it on our website, but you can get it on Amazon. You can get it wherever books are sold. Just get it. I mean, give it to everybody that you know. Give it to, like you mentioned, teenagers for sure.
Because I think they can understand. Even it's not like this pro thing where they're gonna kids or parents are scared their kid's gonna run out and join the military. It's the journey that he took and what he overcame. And these kids who are feeling insecure, they got to know that there's other guys out there just like them, and they did it, and these kids can also get through it. And it's important, and that's why I did it for my grandkids. And I think I told you my granddaughter, she first week in boot camp, and I gave her one of these books for the trip, and she read it, and she said, when I read the story, she goes, I hate boot camp so much, and she goes, but I realized, life is tough, and it's a journey, and we have to go through these things. And Mike was my inspiration. She goes, we had to run 1.5 miles, and I've never run faster. And she goes, she says, thanks, Grandpa, for writing the book. It's important. So eventually, all the kids will get one, and a couple of words I want to take out, but I don't know. It's a true story, so what am I going to do?
It's surprisingly clean considering it's about a bunch of SEALs.
Yeah.
But no, it's awesome. And any other closing thoughts? I think that gets us up to present date.
No, I do want to thank you for the respect for our family, and especially how much you helped out Sally. I mean, she really appreciated in the time where she couldn't get to the into the cemetery, and she says to me, she goes, "I hope I didn't disturb him or anything. I thought he was on base." And I go, "Well, what was he wearing?" "I think he was just wearing T-shirts and his shorts." And I said, "I don't think that's the uniform of the day."
No, that wasn't the uniform of the day.
I think you're on vacation or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I wasn't at work. Yeah, got a call and hey, if Sally wants to go and visit her son at Rosecrans, she's going to get in there.
Yeah, and she was thrilled. She was just so happy because it's like an hour and a half, 2 hours drive.
Yeah.
And she didn't know that they closed up, at that time. But I really want to thank you because she was treated very well with the SEALs and with you. And I also want to thank you for attending her funeral.
Yeah, it was an honor
very
to be
nice.
there. It was an honor to be there, and it's an honor to help share the story of Mikey. And thanks for joining us. Thanks for the sacrifice of you, your whole family. I mean thanks for raising a son like Mikey and for sharing him with us. We won't forget him.
Well, we really appreciate the SEAL community, and like I said, we appreciated the way we were treated. The respect from you and this family was important. I just wanted to close that out because who knows when I'm going to see you again, and I really appreciate this moment. So thanks, Jocko.
Thank you. And with that, George Monsoor has left the building. And once again, life is a gift. And thanks for listening. We appreciate it. And if you want to support the podcast, well, first of all, get the book. Like I said, I read like little pieces of the book. The book has a bunch more in it. They did a great job writing it. So order the book. What is it? Is it Christmas season yet? Or
Yeah.
Yeah.
Technically, I think it's kind of the beginning.
even
of
if you're having a lean Christmas,
Yeah.
even if you're having a lean Christmas, just order the book today, and you can give it to everybody that you know. So we'll just start with that. Support this book, please. If you want to further support the podcast while you're supporting yourself, go and get some Jocko Fuel from jockofuel.com. You can get drinks, energy drinks. You can get protein. You can get joint warfare. Bunch of stuff that's going to help you. jockofuel.com. Also, you can get the drinks at Wawa. You can get everything at Vitamin Shop, the military commissaries, Hannaford's, Dash stores in Maryland, Wakefern and ShopRite, Circle K in Florida, HEB in Tejas, Murphy's in the Southeast, and Meyer in the Midwest. So if you need Jocko Fuel, go there and get it. Or jockofuel.com.
It's true. Yeah, George offline was asking about like, hey, do you have anything for joints and aches? Because I'm getting older.
Mm-hmm. We do.
We do.
Yeah, if you go read the reviews of Joint Warfare, it's legit.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, I mean, when you're young, you don't pay attention to that kind of stuff. But if you maintain like solid health, joint, bro, you'll flow right into old adulthood and be fine. Mm-hmm. Trust me, I know.
Is that where you're at?
That's where I'm at. Old adulthood.
Yeah, that's super curl too.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's kind of a double. It's kind of a double attack.
Yeah. They pair together well, as we say.
So there you go. jockofuel.com. Get it.
Also, Origin USA. Hunt coming out.
Yeah. Yeah, could you feel that once George started talking about factory and production, I was like almost going to go down the path of all of a sudden we could be talking about made in America and what it's like running production and what it's like to, you know, build or make clothing, because that's what he was doing, running a factory.
Yeah.
So, but I refrained from going down the path and talking about that. But we are making stuff in America. OriginUSA.com. Go get some stuff there. Get hunt gear, by the way. We're making it as fast as we can. Hey, look, we know you bought it.
Is it still pre-order right now?
No. We're shipping it out as fast as we can.
Oh, it's just like high demand.
Yeah, I haven't, but we're shipping it out as fast as we can. We're making it as fast as we can. We appreciate the patience. We're working it. That's what we're doing. But hey, jeans, get those Delta jeans, the Delta 68s. Delta 68s are just the deal.
Yep.
Kind of 100%. Now look, if you live in Michigan, you live in Minnesota, you might get the factory jeans, which are a little heavier because it's wintertime. You might be feeling it. Yeah. If you're in the Southern America or in a warm place in the world, you're going to want those Delta 68s. All day. And you're probably training jiu-jitsu. That's how it all started, by the way. The jiu-jitsu gis. You don't need to get one that's made in a communist country. No. You get one that's made by free people, not slaves. No. That's OriginUSA.com. Go get it.
Yep, it's true. Also, Jocko's store. Jocko's store. That's where you can get your shirts and hoodies and hats and stuff. Rash guards on there as well. But yeah, discipline equals freedom. It's good. You want to represent. It's a good place to get your stuff.
Can you get that thing that you're wearing right now? Is that a
yes?
Is that a Jocko store?
Yep. It's
Deluxe.
It's called Team Discipline.
Team Discipline.
Yep.
You named it.
Yep.
You're over there naming shirts now.
Well, they all have names.
Okay.
Actually, you know what? Okay, so you know the shirt you're wearing right now? Your uniform, what is that tier? I forget how the tiers work in uniforms. 3?
I don't know if there's such a thing as a tier in uniforms.
Or what do you call it? There's like the dress.
Oh, yeah.
And then
dress blues and or whatever. Class A's or something like this.
Okay, yeah. Well, either way.
My general uniform.
That's your uniform, right? That shirt. That shirt is called Black Ops.
I actually knew that, so I guess I knew this.
Yes.
I knew this shirt was called.
But there's
What's the white one called?
Declassified.
Oh.
And then now there's a new one.
Cleverness.
What's the new one? It's just like that, but instead of the dark gray, it's red. It's called Red Team.
Dang, look at you. Can I get a gray one?
Yeah. I don't, what would that be called? Yeah, I don't know. We don't currently make the gray one, but hey, look, I'll look into it. I know a guy, and maybe we'll make that happen. A gray one, huh?
Could be cool.
Gray
I
shirt.
like gray shirts because they don't get dirty, but they're cool in the sun.
Call it gray area or gray operations. Isn't that a thing? When it's not right or wrong, it's like in the gray.
We could call it gray area.
Gray area, one of those things. All right. Either way, yes, Jocko's store. We also have the shirt locker. These designs are interesting. The last one is called, or this month is called The Heavies.
Mm-hmm. That's a badass T-shirt, by the way.
That's a good one. Yeah. Gary
The Heavies.
Yeah, it was good.
K-Dog.
Good. K-Dog all day. Yeah,
The Heavies is good.
Yeah.
That little section of that podcast.
Yeah.
Freaking good section. The Heavies are rolling in.
Yep. But yeah, that's a subscription scenario. You get a new shirt every month. People seem to like it, so check that out also. It's called the Shirt Locker. It's on Jocko Store.
Yep. And subscribe to the podcast and subscribe to JockoUnderground.com. This is why we're doing it, because right now you see some social media activities that are going on right now. There's mayhem out there. Right? Isn't there mayhem out there?
It's mayhem out there.
There's mayhem out there. So we got to watch out for that. And, well, you just got to watch out for that. So that's why we have Jocko Underground. We got a YouTube. You can subscribe to that. Origin USA has some stuff on YouTube too. Check that one out. Psychological Warfare. Flipside Canvas, Dakota Meyer. Make some cool stuff to hang on your wall. Books. Already, obviously, Defend Us in Battle. Just order that book. Just get it. Only Cry for the Living by Holly McKay. Get that book. And then I've written a bunch of books too, but whatever. Kids books. Mikey and the Dragons. Let's give that one some props.
Oh, yeah.
Mikey and the Dragons, Overcoming Fear. Obviously, Mikey, the character, is named after Mike Monsoor. About overcoming fear. Echelon Front. We have a leadership consultancy. We solve problems through leadership. Go to echelonfront.com for details. Next event, Orlando. April 3rd through the 5th. That's the next muster. April 3rd through the 5th, 2023. It's going to come quick. That's the weird thing. And it's going to sell out quick. Everything sells out. We oversold. The last muster, we oversold. We had to like move the instructor seating to the behind the curtain type scenario.
Yeah.
So we won't make that mistake again, but we will sell out. So there you go. Orlando, April 3rd through the 5th, 2023. And then Dallas is also in 2023. We got the battlefield. We got FTX. We got all kinds of good stuff going on. EchelonFront.com. We also have online training at Extreme Ownership Academy. Go to extremeownership.com. We covering the stuff. I was there. I was on there live today answering questions. Leif was on there live today answering questions. We have courses to take. So go to extremeownership.com if you want to learn how to live your life better, especially your interactions with other humans. And if you want to help service members, active and retired, you want to help their families, Gold Star families, check out Mark Lee's mom, Mama Lee. She's got a charity organization, and she will be coming on the podcast very soon. And if you want to donate or get involved with her organization, go to americasmightywarriors.org. And also don't forget about Micah Fink up there in the North Country with heroesandhorses.org, helping veterans find themselves while they get a little bit lost out there in the wilderness. And speaking of social media, we're on social media. On the gram, on Twitter. It's a new Twitter these days. Yep. Nothing's changed really. Have you noticed any change yet? Besides the fact that you lost your Twitter account?
Yeah, that was before.
You got hacked.
I got hacked, and then they abused it. They took it over.
Yeah.
They took it. The hackers took over my account to do a bunch of spam stuff.
That sucks.
And then Twitter shut it down because it was a bot now. But then, luckily, you said, Trey, get it back, your old handle. Yeah. So I registered again under my old handle, and I got it back.
So you're still at Echo Charles?
I'm still at Echo Charles. Yeah.
I wonder if that's going to change because Elon's coming in, $8, and all this stuff is going on. So
yeah,
we'll see.
I heard about that.
People are freaking out about all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. The thing is, all the social media, Facebook, the gram, Twitter, you just got to watch out because the algorithm will grab you. Mm-hmm. That's what's going to happen. And once again, thanks to George Monsoor for coming on board, and really the entire Monsoor family who I've been blessed to have gotten to know over the past 15 years. Just been amazing, an honor to know them, and it's an honor to be here and share the story of Mikey, absolute hero and example for all of us. So thank you to the entire Monsoor family, and thanks to all the people from the military in general, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. As you could probably tell, we had an incredible relationship with all of them. And we thank you for supporting us on the battlefield and in the past. And now those that are still active duty out there protecting us today. Thank you. And we also want to thank our police and law enforcement, firefighters, paramedics, EMTs, dispatchers, correctional officers, Border Patrol, Secret Service, all first responders out there. You protect us here at home, and we thank you for it. And everyone else out there on Mikey's gravestone at Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery. He gives some advice on there. It's the same thing that he told his dad all those years before deployment, that no matter what happens, I have no regrets. So let's go try to live like Mikey did. Work hard. If you get knocked down, get back up again and overcome. And of course, put others first. Live your life and leave no regrets. And until next time, this is Echo and Jocko out.